20 years ago, my wife looked at our 4-year-old son who was rocking back and forth in the corner of our living room and told me she refused to bury her life in a hole of silence. She packed a single red suitcase, stepped over his toy blocks, and walked out the door without looking back. She left me with a failing auto repair shop, a mountain of debt, and a nonverbal child the doctors said would likely never live independently. I raised him alone. I washed the grease from my hands every night to hold him when the world got too loud. I fought for every therapy session and every special education class. Then the miracle happened. The silence she despised turned into colors. At 14, his first canvas sold for $500. Yesterday at 24, one of his abstract pieces sold for $1.8 million. And exactly 3 hours after the gavel fell, she came back. She did not come alone. She brought a lawyer, a new husband, and a lawsuit demanding full conservatorship over the son she abandoned. I told my lawyer to prepare for war. I told him we would burn every dime before she touched a penny, but my son, the boy who used to hide under tables when the phone rang, put a hand on my shoulder and whispered the most terrifying thing I have ever heard. Let me handle it. My name is Vernon Hayes. I am 68 years old and my hands are rough from 40 years of turning wrenches and changing oil. I am a simple man who learned the hard way that blood does not make a family, showing up does. Before I tell you how a quiet artist destroyed a pack of wolves without raising his voice, I want to know where you are listening from. Let me know in the comments. And please hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to protect someone you love from a person who claimed to love them. The air in the gallery smelled like expensive perfume and cold cash. It was a scent I never got used to, even after Kendrick became the darling of the New York art scene. I stood in the back near the exit sign, tugging at the collar of a tuxedo that felt like a straitjacket. My hands, still scarred from decades of engine work, were shoved deep into my pockets. I was out of place here, surrounded by people who spent more on a handbag than I used to make in a year, but I wasn't looking at them. I was watching my son. Kendrick sat in the front row wearing his noise-canceling headphones. He was 24 now, a handsome young man with my broad shoulders and his mother's high cheekbones. He was rocking slightly, a rhythm only he could feel, his long fingers tapping a silent code against his knee. To everyone else in the room, he was the mysterious genius, the savant of color. To me, he was just Ken, the boy who only ate grilled cheese sandwiches cut into triangles and needed the tags cut off his shirts. Next to him sat Sloane, my daughter-in-law, a white girl from Connecticut with a spine made of titanium. She was whispering something to him, probably telling him how much time was left before we could leave. She was the only person besides me who knew that Kendrick didn't care about the gala. He didn't care about the fame. He just wanted to go home to his studio and paint. The auctioneer, a man with a voice like polished brass, pointed his gavel at a bidder in the balcony. Going once at $1.7 million. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked at Sloane. She squeezed Kendrick's hand. He didn't react. He was looking at the dust motes dancing in the spotlight beam. Going twice. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. This was the sale that would change everything. This was the security I had prayed for during those long nights when I was fixing radiators at 3 in the morning just to pay for Ken's speech therapy. This was his future, sold, for $1.8 million to the gentleman on the phone. The gavel cracked against the wood. The sound echoed like a gunshot, signaling victory. The room erupted in polite, wealthy applause. Flashbulbs started popping like fireworks. Sloane jumped up and hugged Kendrick. He stiffened, but he let her do it because he trusted her. I let out a breath. I felt like I had been holding since 1994. We had done it. My boy was safe. He was set for life. I started to make my way toward them, a proud grin stretching across my face. I wanted to tell him we could buy that house with the skylights he liked. I wanted to tell him he never had to worry about money again. But then the double doors at the entrance of the gallery didn't just open. They slammed against the walls. The applause died down, rippling into confused silence. Heads turned. I stopped dead in my tracks. Standing in the doorway, framed by the city lights behind her, was Delphine. She looked different than the woman who walked out on us. The cheap denim jacket was gone, replaced by a fur coat that looked like it cost more than my first house. Her hair was straightened and dyed a honey blonde. Her face was tighter, pulled back by surgery and expensive creams. But I knew those eyes. Cold, calculating, predatory. She wasn't alone. On her left was a man in a shiny shark-skin suit looking around the room with hungry eyes. That had to be Gavin, the day trader she left me for, or maybe the one after that. On her right was a man carrying a briefcase wearing the kind of suit that screamed billable hours. My stomach dropped. I tried to move to get between her and Kendrick, but the crowd was too thick. Delphine spotted Kendrick in the front row, her face instantly transformed. She didn't look like a woman crashing an event. She looked like a mother reuniting with a lost child in a movie. It was a performance, a sick, twisted performance. She ran. She actually ran down the center aisle, her heels clicking on the polished concrete floor. "My baby," she shrieked. Her voice was shrill, cutting through the sophisticated murmur of the gallery. "Oh God, my baby boy." "No," I shouted, shoving a waiter aside. "Don't touch him." But I was too slow, and she was too fast. Kendrick was still wearing his headphones. He didn't hear her coming. He was in his safe zone processing the lights and the patterns. He didn't see the threat until her arms were already around him. She grabbed him from behind, burying her face in his neck, sobbing loudly. For an autistic person with severe sensory processing disorder, an unexpected touch isn't just annoying. It is physical pain. It is an electric shock. It is a bomb going off in their nervous system. Kendrick didn't just flinch, he exploded. He let out a guttural scream, a sound of pure terror that shattered the atmosphere of the room. He leaped up, knocking his chair over. He flailed his arms wildly, trying to get the sensation of her off of him. His hand connected with her face, a frantic defensive slap. Delphine went down. She fell to the floor in a heap of fur and drama, holding her cheek. Kendrick backed away, hitting the wall. He slid down, curling into a ball, his hands over his ears, rocking violently. He started hitting the side of his head with his fists. Thump, thump, thump. He was trying to regulate the chaos in his brain, trying to drive out the sudden invasion of his space. "Get away from him!" I roared, finally breaking through the circle of stunned onlookers. I placed myself between my son and the woman on the floor. Sloane was already on the ground next to Kendrick. She didn't try to hold him. She knew better. She just created a barrier with her body, shielding him from the cameras, whispering a counting sequence he used to calm down. 1, 2, 4, 8, 16. Her voice was steady, a lighthouse in the storm. Delphine stayed on the floor. She looked up and I saw the flash of the cameras reflect in her eyes. She knew exactly where the lenses were. She didn't look at Kendrick, who was hyperventilating against the wall. She didn't ask if he was okay. She looked at the reporters. They kept him from me. She wailed, tears streaming down her face with impressive speed. "Look what they did to my son. They turned him into an animal. I am his mother. I am here to save him." The man in the shark-skin suit, Gavin, stepped forward, helping her up with exaggerated care. He pointed a finger at me. "You people should be ashamed," he shouted for the benefit of the room. "Keeping a mother from her disabled child. We are taking him home. Tonight." The lawyer stepped forward, holding up a manila envelope. "We have a temporary emergency custody order," he announced, his voice smooth and deadly. "Pending a competency hearing. Mrs. Delphine Hayes Miller is asserting her rights." I stood there, my fists clenched so hard my knuckles turned gray. I could hear Kendrick whimpering behind me. I could see Sloane's eyes burning with a rage that matched my own. But what I saw most clearly was Delphine's eyes. She wasn't looking at Kendrick, who was currently suffering a meltdown because of her selfishness. She wasn't looking at me, the man she betrayed. She was looking past us. She was staring directly at the easel on the stage. She was staring at the red sticker that said "Sold." She was staring at the number 1.8 million written on the display board. She didn't see a son. She saw a lottery ticket. I stepped forward, my mechanic's chest heaving, ready to tear Gavin's head off right there in front of the New York elite. I didn't care about the jail time. I didn't care about the scandal. Sloane grabbed my ankle. I looked down. She shook her head once, sharp and quick. "Not here," she mouthed. I looked back at Delphine. She was smiling through her fake tears, basking in the flash of the cameras. She thought she had won. She thought the script was written. The poor mother returning to save her helpless child from the angry, aggressive father. She had no idea that she had just walked into a trap. But looking at my son rocking and crying on the floor, I knew the cost of this war was going to be higher than any painting, and I was ready to pay it. The morning sun hit the kitchen table, but it brought no warmth. The silence in our house was usually peaceful, a comfortable quiet, where Kendrick could eat his oatmeal and organize his blueberries by size. Today the silence felt heavy. It felt like the air before a thunderstorm. Sloane was staring at her coffee cup, her knuckles white as she gripped the handle. Kendrick was rocking back and forth in his chair, harder than usual, a low hum vibrating in his throat. He sensed the tension. He always sensed it before we did. When the doorbell rang at 8 in the morning, it did not sound like a visitor. It sounded like a warning. I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel and walked to the door. My steps were heavy. I knew who it was before I even opened it. A man in a cheap suit stood there holding a thick envelope. He did not look me in the eye. He just mumbled my name, shoved the papers into my chest, and walked away as fast as he could. I closed the door and opened the envelope right there in the hallway. The first word I saw was conservatorship. I am a mechanic. I know how to fix a transmission, and I know how to rebuild an engine block. I did not go to law school. But I knew what that word meant. It meant slavery. It meant that Delphine was not just asking for money. She was asking for the legal right to become Kendrick's brain. She wanted the right to decide where he lived, who he saw, what he ate, and how he spent every single dime he earned. She was arguing that Kendrick was an incapacitated adult and that I, his elderly father with a high school education, was unfit to manage an estate worth millions. My hands shook, not from fear, from a rage so hot it felt like I had swallowed a piston. She wanted to turn my son into a piece of property. I walked back into the kitchen and threw the papers on the table. Sloane picked them up. She read the first page, and I saw the color drain from her face. She looked at Kendrick, who was now lining up his vitamins in a perfect straight line. She wants full control, Sloane whispered, her voice trembling. She is claiming emergency jurisdiction. She says you are manipulating him. She says I am an opportunist. She wants to move him to a residential facility for evaluation. That is just a fancy word for an institution, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Over my dead body. 2 hours later, we were sitting in the office of Saul Cohen. Cohen was expensive, cynical, and had been practicing law since before I was born. His office smelled like old leather and cigar smoke. He read the motion Delphine's lawyers had filed. He read it slowly, turning every page with a dry finger. The sound of the paper turning was the only noise in the room. Finally, he took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Vernon," he said, looking at me with tired eyes. "This is bad. They have filed in probate court. They are painting a very specific picture. They are saying you are a 70-year-old retired mechanic with a heart condition. They are saying Kendrick has the mental capacity of a child. They are arguing that suddenly, with this influx of money, he is vulnerable to fraud. And specifically, they are pointing the finger at you and Sloane." I slammed my hand on his mahogany desk. The wood groaned. "Let them point," I shouted, standing up. "Let them point their fingers." "Where were those fingers 20 years ago? You asked them that, Cohen. You asked the court where Delphine was when Kendrick was 4 years old." Cohen held up a hand. "Vernon, listen to me. The court does not care about 20 years ago. The court cares about the safety of the assets right now. I don't care about the assets," I roared. "I care about the truth. She says I am unfit. She wrote in that filing that I am uneducated. You tell the judge I sold my shop. Tell him that. Tell him I sold Hayes Auto Repair. The only thing my father left me because the insurance wouldn't cover Kendrick's speech therapy. Tell him I spent 10 years working double shifts at Jiffy Lube, coming home with oil embedded in my skin so deep I couldn't scrub it out just so I could pay for a private tutor because the public school system gave up on him." I paced around the small office, my chest heaving. She left a note, Cohen. She didn't even say goodbye to him. She left a note on the refrigerator that said she refused to bury her life in a hole of silence. That is what she called our son. A hole. And now she wants to be his guardian. Now she wants to decide if he can buy a paintbrush. Cohen watched me, his face unmoving. "I know that, Vernon, and you know that. But in the eyes of the law, she is the biological mother. She has a husband with a finance background. She has a team of lawyers. And she has a narrative. They are going to say you are holding him back. They are going to say you are isolating him." He picked up a piece of paper from the file. "They have a statement here from a neighbor claiming you shout at Kendrick, claiming the house is unsafe." I laughed, a bitter, harsh sound. "That is probably Old Man Henderson. He never forgave me for refusing to fix his transmission for free." "It doesn't matter if it is true," Cohen said sharply. "It matters that it is in the file. We are fighting a war of perception. And right now you look like an angry, overwhelmed old man, and she looks like a concerned mother stepping in to save the day." I sat back down, feeling the energy drain out of me. "So what do we do?" "We fight," Cohen said. "But this is not a fist fight, Vernon. You cannot punch your way out of this. This is a siege. They are going to try to starve you out. They have asked for a temporary freeze on all assets belonging to the Hayes Trust until the hearing. I frowned. What does that mean? It means Cohen said, leaning forward, that as of this morning, Kendrick's bank accounts are locked. The money from the sale yesterday is in escrow. You cannot touch it. You cannot spend $1 of it. I looked at Sloane. She was checking her phone under the table. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with panic. "Vernon," she whispered. "What is it?" I asked. Sloane turned the phone screen toward me. It was her banking app. There was a big red banner across the top. Account frozen. "It's not just the trust," she said, her voice shaking. "It is our joint account. The one we use for groceries. The one we use for the electric bill. They froze everything." I looked back at Cohen. "Can they do that?" Cohen nodded grimly. "If they argue that you have commingled funds or that you might flee with the money, yes. They can freeze it all pending an audit." My phone rang in my pocket. It was a sharp, intrusive sound. I pulled it out. It was the owner of the gallery in Chelsea, the man who had shaken my hand yesterday and called me a visionary father. I answered it. "Mr. Hayes," his voice was cold, completely different from yesterday. "I am calling about the rental fee for next month's exhibition. The payment was scheduled for this morning, but the transfer was declined." I closed my eyes. "There must be a mistake," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "There is no mistake," he said. "We received a legal notice from a firm representing Mrs. Delphine Hayes Miller. They have instructed us that any payments made to you or your daughter-in-law will be considered aiding in the embezzlement of a protected person's estate. Mr. Hayes, I run a business. I cannot get involved in a family feud. If the funds are not cleared by 5 o'clock today, we will have to cancel the show and remove Kendrick's pieces from the floor." He hung up before I could say another word. I stared at the phone. My son had just sold a painting for nearly $2 million. On paper, we were rich. On paper, we were successful. But in that office with the smell of old cigars and the weight of the law crushing down on us, I realized the terrifying truth. We were standing on a gold mine, but we could not afford to buy a loaf of bread. Delphine knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't trying to win a legal argument, she was trying to break us. She knew I had no savings. She knew we lived month to month until this sale. She was going to squeeze us until we couldn't breathe, until we had to come crawling to her just to keep the lights on. I looked at Sloane. She wasn't crying anymore. She was typing furiously on her phone. "What are you doing?" I asked. "I am canceling the catering for the celebration dinner," she said, her voice flat. "And I am listing my car for sale online." I reached out and stopped her hand. "No," I said. "You love that car. We need cash, Vernon," she said, looking me in the eye. "We need cash for food. We need cash for Kendrick's medication. And we need cash to pay Mr. Cohen." I looked at Cohen. He didn't say anything, but he didn't offer to work for free either. I stood up and walked to the window. Down on the street, people were walking to lunch. They looked so normal. They had no idea that a life could be dismantled in a single morning with a few pieces of paper. I thought about Kendrick. He was probably at home right now painting. He didn't know that his world was being fenced in. He didn't know that his mother, the woman who abandoned him, was now using his own success to put a cage around him. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass. I felt the anger settling in my gut, heavy and cold like a stone. "Let them freeze the money," I said quietly. "Let them lock the doors. I survived on peanut butter and tap water for 5 years after she left. I can do it again." I turned back to face them. "Cohen, file the objection. Sloane, do not sell the car yet. I have a stash of cash in an old coffee can in the garage that I saved for emergencies. It is not much, but it will buy us groceries for a week." "You think you can outlast them?" Cohen asked, raising an eyebrow. "They have millions in backing. You have a coffee can." "I am not trying to outlast them," I said, grabbing my coat. "I am trying to buy enough time for them to make a mistake. Delphine is greedy, and greedy people always get careless. We just need to be ready when she slips." I walked out of that office with my head high, but inside I was terrified. We were at war, and the enemy had just cut off our supply lines. I didn't know it then, but the financial freeze was just the opening shot. The real weapon was about to be fired, and it wasn't aimed at my bank account. It was aimed at the one thing that held our family together. It was aimed at Sloane. The television in our living room was usually reserved for baseball games and the evening news. But that Tuesday night, it became a portal to hell. Sloane sat on the edge of the sofa, biting her fingernail until it bled. I stood by the window, looking out at the dark street, holding a glass of iced tea so tight my hand cramped. On the screen, Delphine sat in a beige armchair opposite a famous talk show host whose specialty was destroying lives for ratings. The studio lighting was soft, designed to make her look angelic. She dabbed at her dry eyes with a tissue. The caption at the bottom of the screen read, "The mother who was forced to run." I listened as the woman who abandoned my son 20 years ago rewrote history in real time. She told the host that I was a violent alcoholic. She said I used to come home from the auto shop smelling of whiskey and grease looking for a fight. She told a story about how I threw a wrench at her while she was holding baby Kendrick. It was a lie so specific and so vile that I felt the bile rise in my throat. I have not touched a drop of liquor since 1995 precisely because I needed to be sober for Kendrick. I never raised a hand to her. I worshipped the ground she walked on right up until the day she left. But the audience did not know that. They gasped on cue. They shook their heads in disgust. The host leaned in with practiced empathy and asked why she left her son behind if I was so dangerous. Delphine looked directly into the camera. Her eyes were wet. She was giving the performance of a lifetime. "I did not leave him," she whispered, her voice trembling perfectly. "I escaped. I had to get away to survive. And once I was gone, Vernon threatened to hurt Kendrick if I ever came back. He held my son hostage. He told me he would put him in a state institution if I ever tried to contact them. So I stayed away. I stayed away to protect my boy. And now that he is an adult, I am finally strong enough to come back and save him." The audience erupted in applause. They cheered for her bravery. They cheered for the woman who left a 4-year-old child rocking in his own waist because she wanted to go party in Miami with a day trader. I looked down at the glass in my hand. Without thinking, I squeezed. The thick glass shattered. Shards sliced into my palm. I did not feel the pain. I only felt the warm trickle of blood mixing with the cold tea dripping onto the carpet. Sloane jumped up and ran to the kitchen to get a towel. I just stared at the screen. She had turned me into a monster. In 20 minutes, she had erased 20 years of sacrifice. She had taken every night I stayed up holding Kendrick through a fever, and every weekend I spent working extra shifts to pay for his sensory toys, and she twisted it into a story of abuse. I turned off the TV, but the silence that followed was worse. I knew what was coming. You cannot tell a lie that big to 10 million people and expect nothing to happen. The next morning, the world was different. It started with a low hum like a swarm of angry bees. I was in the kitchen bandaging my hand when I heard it. I looked out the front window. There were people on my lawn, strangers. They were holding signs. Some of them were homemade, scrawled with markers. "Save Kendrick. Arrest the abuser. Free the artist." I saw a young woman with blue hair holding a phone up, live streaming herself screaming at my house. I saw men who looked like they were looking for a fight. But worse than the strangers, I saw my neighbors. People I had fixed cars for. People I had waived labor costs for when they were tight on cash. They were standing on their porches watching. They were not helping. They were watching to see if the monster on TV was real. "We have to get Kendrick to the studio," Sloane said, running into the room. She was pale. "He has a deadline. If he does not finish the commission by Friday, we are in breach of contract. And he needs his routine, Vernon. If he stays here with this noise, he will fall apart." She was right. Routine was oxygen for Kendrick. We grabbed his noise-canceling headphones and his weighted blanket. We moved quickly like soldiers in a war zone. I opened the front door, and the wall of sound hit us instantly. "Coward," the crowd screamed. I put my arm around Kendrick, keeping his head down. Sloane walked on his other side, shielding him with her body. We moved toward the old sedan parked in the driveway. It was only 20 feet, but it felt like miles. Something wet and heavy hit my shoulder. I looked down. It was a raw egg sliding down my jacket, leaving a trail of yellow slime. Then another one hit the car. Then a balloon filled with red paint exploded against the front door of the house, looking like a blood splatter. "Murderer," someone shouted. Kendrick stopped moving. He froze right there in the middle of the driveway. I felt his body stiffen under my arm. To him, this was not just noise. It was a physical assault. The shouting, the impacts, the smell of the eggs, the visual chaos of the signs, it was all too much. His brain was processing everything at once, and it was overloading. "Ken, move," I pleaded, trying to guide him. "Son, please get in the car." But he could not hear me. He started to hum a high-pitched keening sound that tore at my heart. He covered his ears with his hands, pressing so hard his knuckles turned white. Sloane opened the back door of the car. "Get him in, Vernon!" she screamed over the noise of the crowd. I tried to push him gently, but he was dead weight. He was 6 feet tall and strong. When he planted his feet, he was like a tree. A rock hit the pavement near his foot. He flinched violently, and then he broke. He dropped to his knees on the concrete. He did not care about the paint or the glass or the crowd. He curled into a tight ball, burying his head in his knees. The humming turned into a scream. It was a sound of pure agony, a sound of a soul being ripped apart. He started hitting himself. This is the part of autism people do not talk about on the inspiration blogs. When the sensory overload gets too high, the pain has to go somewhere. Kendrick slammed his open palms against the sides of his head, hard, once, twice, thrice. "Stop it, Ken," I shouted, dropping to my knees beside him. I ignored the crowd. I ignored the camera's phones recording us. I wrapped my arms around my son, trying to pin his arms to his sides. I had to stop him from hurting himself. He fought me. He was panicked and strong. He thrashed backward and his elbow caught me in the jaw. I tasted blood, but I did not let go. I squeezed him tighter, using my weight to press him into the ground. Sloane was there too. She was crying, but she was working. She draped the weighted blanket over his head, creating a dark cocoon. She put her hands on his back, rubbing in firm, circular motions. "Deep pressure," she said, her voice breaking. "Deep pressure, Ken. You are safe. You are a rock. You are an island." We stayed like that on the driveway for 10 minutes. A 68-year-old man and a 25-year-old woman wrestling a grown man on the concrete while a mob of strangers cheered and jeered. They thought I was attacking him. I could hear them screaming, "Look, he is hurting him right now." They did not know I was hugging him for his life. They did not know that every time he hit himself, it hurt me 1,000 times more. They saw a villain restraining a victim. I saw my little boy who was scared of the dark trying to beat the scary noises out of his own head. Eventually, the fight went out of him. The blanket did its work. The darkness calmed him. He went limp against my chest, sobbing quietly. I looked up. My face was wet with tears and sweat. The crowd had quieted down a little, but only to get better audio for their videos. I looked at the girl with the blue hair who was still filming. I looked her right in the eye. "Are you happy now?" I whispered, my voice hoarse. "Is this what you wanted?" We managed to get him into the car. Sloane drove. I sat in the back with Kendrick holding his hand. He was staring at nothing, his eyes empty and exhausted. I looked out the back window as we drove away. My house. The house I had worked my whole life to pay for was covered in red paint and broken eggs. The word "monster" was spray painted in black across the garage door. Delphine had not just attacked my reputation. She had destroyed the sanctuary I built for my son. She had turned his safe haven into a war zone. And looking at Kendrick's bruised forehead where he had hit himself, I realized this was no longer a legal dispute. This was not about money anymore. This was an assassination attempt. She was trying to kill his spirit because she knew that was the only way to break the bond between us. I wiped the blood from my lip. I looked at Sloane's eyes in the rearview mirror. They were hard like flint. "Call Cohen," I said quietly. "Tell him to stop playing defense. Tell him I want to attack." "Vernon, we have no money," Sloane said. "I do not care," I said. "We are going to find a way. Delphine wants a villain, fine, I will be the villain, but she is going to learn that you do not corner a mechanic who has nothing left to lose." I touched the bandage on my hand where the glass had cut me. The pain was sharp and real. It was the only thing keeping me focused. We were going to hit back, and we were going to hit back hard. The only weapon left in my arsenal was the truth. And the truth lived in a crumbling brick house on East 42nd Street. I drove my old sedan through the neighborhood where Kendrick grew up. It was a place where the streetlights flickered and the potholes swallowed tires, but it was the only place where people knew the real story. I was looking for Arthur Henderson. He was 80 years old now. He was the man who lived next door to us for 15 years. He was there the day Delphine walked out. He saw her drag that red suitcase down the driveway while Kendrick screamed in the window. He was the one who brought over a casserole that first night because he knew I didn't know how to cook. If anyone could clear my name, it was Arthur. I pulled up to his house. The paint was peeling and the porch sagged on the left side. I walked up the steps feeling a heaviness in my chest that had nothing to do with my heart condition. Arthur was sitting in his rocking chair just like he always did. He looked frail. His eyes were milky with age, but he smiled when he saw me. "Vernon," he said, his voice cracking like dry leaves, "I saw you on the news. They are saying some terrible things." I sat down on the railing. "It is all lies, Arthur," I said. "You were there. You know what happened. You know she left us." He nodded slowly. I remember that boy crying. I remember you working 2 jobs. You were a good father, Vernon. You were the best father that boy could have asked for." I felt a lump in my throat. I needed to hear that more than I realized. "I need your help, Arthur," I said. "I need you to tell the lawyers what you saw. I need you to testify that I didn't abuse him." Arthur looked down at his hands. They were trembling slightly. He rubbed his knuckles. "I don't know, Vernon. I am old. I don't like courts. Please, Arthur," I begged. "They are going to take him away. They are going to put him in a home." He looked up at me then. There was something in his eyes I couldn't place. It looked like fear, but it also looked like shame. He took a deep breath. "Okay," he said softly. "I will tell them. I will tell them the truth." I drove home feeling a spark of hope. It was fragile, but it was there. I called Cohen and told him to set up the deposition. I told Sloan that we had a witness. I thought the tide was finally turning. I was a fool. I should have known that in a war over millions of dollars, loyalty is just another commodity that can be bought and sold. The deposition took place 2 days later in the conference room of a high-rise building downtown. The room was cold and sterile. The walls were glass. The table was polished mahogany that looked like a sheet of black ice. A videographer stood in the corner with a camera pointed at the witness chair. Delphine was there, sitting next to Gavin. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at her phone, scrolling through social media like she was waiting for a nail appointment. Gavin was drumming his fingers on the table, staring at me with a smirk that made me want to reach across the table and choke him. Arthur was brought in by a paralegal. He looked small in the big leather chair. He was wearing a suit that was 2 sizes too big for him, probably the one he bought for funerals. He wouldn't look at me. He kept his eyes fixed on the water pitcher in the center of the table. Cohen started the questioning. He was gentle. He asked Arthur about his background, about how long he had lived next to us. Arthur answered in monosyllables. Yes. No. 20 years. Then Cohen got to the point. "Mr. Henderson, on the afternoon of July 4th, 2004, did you witness an interaction between Mr. Hayes and his wife Delphine?" Arthur shifted in his seat. He licked his lips. "Yes. Please tell us what you saw," Cohen said, leaning forward. Arthur took a sip of water. His hand shook so much the water splashed onto his tie. He put the glass down. "I saw them arguing," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I saw Vernon yelling." Cohen frowned. "And what did Delphine do?" Arthur took a deep breath. He looked up, but not at me. He looked at Gavin. And for a split second I saw Gavin nod, a tiny, almost imperceptible motion. Arthur cleared his throat. "She was trying to take the boy," he said. "She was trying to put him in the car. She was crying. She said she wanted to take him to her mother's house for safety." The room went dead silent. I felt the blood drain from my face. That was not what happened. That was a lie. "And what did Mr. Hayes do?" Cohen asked, his voice tight. Arthur closed his eyes. "He grabbed the boy," he said. "He grabbed him by the arm. Hard. He dragged him back into the house. And then..." He paused. "And then what Mr. Henderson," Delphine's lawyer pressed, leaning in like a vulture. "And then he took him to the garage," Arthur said, his voice gaining strength. "He put him in the garage and he locked the door. It was dark in there, no windows. That boy was screaming in the dark for hours. I could hear him banging on the metal door. Vernon just sat on the porch drinking a beer. He told me he had to teach the boy a lesson about silence." I stopped breathing. The air left my lungs as if I'd been punched in the gut. "Liar," I whispered. Arthur didn't stop. He was reciting a script now. I could hear the rhythm of it. It wasn't his memory. It was a story someone had paid him to tell. He did it all the time. Arthur continued, gaining confidence. He used to say the boy was broken. He used to say he needed to fix him like a car part. He kept him in that garage whenever he made too much noise. "That is a lie," I shouted. My voice boomed off the glass walls. "Vernon, sit down!" Cohen hissed, grabbing my arm. I stood up, knocking my chair over. It crashed to the floor with a sound like a gunshot. "I fixed your roof, Arthur!" I screamed, pointing a shaking finger at the old man. "I shoveled your snow for 15 years. I brought you soup when your wife died. How could you? How much did they pay you?" Arthur flinched, shrinking back into his chair. He looked terrified now, but not of the lie. He was terrified of me. Delphine's lawyer stood up, holding his hands out in a mock defensive posture. "Let the record show that Mr. Hayes is becoming aggressive and threatening the witness." "You bought him," I roared, turning to Gavin. "I know you did. You found a desperate old man and you bought his soul." Gavin didn't flinch. He just smiled. A cold, dead smile. And then he did the one thing he knew would break me. He laughed. It was a soft chuckle, but in that silent room it sounded like a bomb. I lost it. The rage that had been building for 20 years, the anger at the abandonment, the frustration of the last week, the fear of losing Kendrick, it all exploded. I didn't think. I just moved. I lunged across the mahogany table. I wasn't trying to hurt Arthur. I wanted to get to Gavin. I wanted to wipe that smile off his face. I wanted to make him feel the pain he was inflicting on my son. "Vernon No Cohen," shouted. My chest hit the table, sliding on the polished surface. The water pitcher went flying, shattering against the wall. Papers scattered everywhere like confetti. Gavin jumped back, knocking his chair into the wall. He looked scared for a second, and then he looked delighted. He pulled out his phone. "Security," Delphine screamed, her voice shrill and theatrical. "Help, he is attacking us." 2 security guards burst into the room. They were big men. One of them grabbed my left arm, the other grabbed my right. They wrenched my arms behind my back. Pain shot through my shoulders. I wasn't fighting them. I had already realized my mistake. As soon as my feet left the floor, I knew I had walked right into their trap. I stopped struggling. I hung there between the 2 guards, panting, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Get a picture," Gavin shouted. "Get a picture of this." I looked up. Gavin was holding his phone up. The flash went off. Once. Twice. I saw myself through his lens. I saw what the judge would see. I saw what the world would see. A large, angry black man, restrained by security in a room full of suits. A violent man. An unstable man. A man who looked exactly like the monster Delphine had described on television. Arthur was crying now. Real tears this time. He was shaking, staring at me with horror. "I am sorry, Vernon," he whispered. But nobody heard him except me. I looked at Delphine. She wasn't screaming anymore. She was adjusting her blouse. She looked at me with cold satisfaction. "Thank you, Vernon," she said softly. "You just signed the custody papers for me." The guards dragged me out of the room. I didn't look back. I didn't struggle. I felt cold. Colder than I had ever felt in my life. I had gone there to save my son, and instead, I had just handed him over. I had let my anger be their weapon. As they pushed me into the elevator, I realized something terrifying. The law doesn't care about truth. The law cares about evidence. And I had just given them the perfect evidence that I was dangerous. I closed my eyes, and in the darkness, I could see Kendrick. I could see him rocking in the corner, waiting for me to come home. And for the first time in 20 years, I wasn't sure if I ever would. I had not just lost a witness. I had lost the high ground. And in a war like this, the low ground is where they bury you. The legal team that Delphine hired did not just know the law, they knew how to tell a story that America wanted to hear. After they failed to provoke me into another violent outburst, they changed their target. They stopped aiming at the angry black father and turned their sights on the white wife. They knew that in the court of public opinion, the marriage between a beautiful 25-year-old art gallery director and a nonverbal autistic man looked suspicious. They did not need to prove Sloan was a predator, they just needed to make people ask the question. Why is she with him? It started with a blind item in a popular gossip column. Then it became a featured segment on a morning news show. The headline was brutal in its simplicity. Is it love or is it the money? They showed pictures of Sloan wearing designer clothes standing next to Kendrick, who was wearing his noise-canceling headphones and looking away from the camera. They analyzed her body language. They brought in experts who claimed that women often target vulnerable, disabled men to gain control of their finances. They painted my daughter-in-law not as the woman who learned sign language to communicate with her husband, but as a gold digger who found the easiest mark in New York City. I watched Sloan read the comments on social media. Her hands were shaking. People she had never met were calling her a groomer. They were calling her a leech. They said she was taking advantage of a man who could not consent. That was the one that hurt her the most. The idea that Kendrick was a child she was manipulating. They stripped Kendrick of his manhood and they stripped Sloan of her dignity. I sat at the kitchen table watching her scroll through the hate. She was crying silently, tears dripping onto her phone screen. "They do not know us, Vernon," she whispered. "They do not know that he is the one who saved me. They do not know that his honesty is the only thing that makes sense in my life. I took the phone from her hand and turned it off. They do not want to know Sloan, I said. Delphine is feeding them a narrative. She is using race and disability to create a scandal because a scandal creates doubt. And if the judge doubts your intentions, he will give the guardianship to the mother. But the attacks on Sloan were just the softening up bombardment. The real missile was launched 2 days later, and it was a precision strike aimed directly at the heart of my son's universe. Kendrick lives by a strict set of rules. For an autistic mind, rules are safety. Rules are the walls that keep the chaos out. And the most important rule in Kendrick's life is loyalty. To him, a promise is a physical bond. A lie is a physical injury. Delphine knew this. She knew that if she could prove Sloan broke the rules, Kendrick's entire world would collapse. It was a Tuesday afternoon. We were trying to maintain a normal routine. Kendrick was in the living room working on a sketch. His iPad was propped up next to him, playing his favorite ambient music. Suddenly, a message popped up. It was an anonymous number. Usually we screen his messages, but this one came through as a priority alert. Kendrick looked at the screen. I saw his body go rigid. It was not a gradual tension, it was instant. He stopped breathing. The pencil in his hand snapped in half with a sharp crack. I looked up from my newspaper. "Ken, what is it?" He did not answer. He just stared at the screen, his eyes wide with a terror I had not seen since he was a child. I got up and walked over to him. I looked at the iPad. My blood ran cold. It was a photograph, a high-resolution image of Sloan walking out of a hotel room. She was wearing a red dress, and she was kissing a man. The man was tall, handsome, and holding her waist. The timestamp on the photo was from yesterday afternoon. I knew immediately it was fake. I knew Sloan was with me at the lawyer's office yesterday afternoon. I knew she did not own a red dress. I knew that the lighting in the photo was too perfect, too staged. It was a deep fake, a Photoshop job created by someone who knew exactly how to manipulate an image. But Kendrick did not know about deep fakes. Kendrick did not understand that eyes can be lied to. In his binary world, if there is a picture, it is real. If it is real, then Sloan is a liar. If Sloan is a liar, then the foundation of his life is gone. "No, Ken," I said, reaching for the iPad. "That is not real. That is a trick." He snatched the device away from me. He stared at it, analyzing every pixel. To him, the data was conclusive. His wife was with another man. The rule was broken. The safety was gone. Sloan walked into the room carrying a tray of tea. "Hey guys, I made some chamomile," she said with a forced smile. Kendrick made a sound I will never forget. It was a low growl like a wounded animal. He stood up and threw the iPad across the room. It smashed against the wall, shattering the screen. Ken Sloan gasped, dropping the tray. The ceramic mugs broke, splashing hot tea everywhere. Kendrick turned to look at her. His face was twisted in agony. He did not see his wife. He saw a traitor. He pointed a shaking finger at the door. "Go!" he screamed. It was a guttural, raw sound. "Go! Unsafe! You are unsafe!" Sloan took a step forward, her hands reaching out. "Ken, what is wrong? What happened? Do not touch me!" he roared, backing away until his back hit the bookshelf. "Liar. You are a liar. The picture says you are a liar." I stepped in between them. "Sloan, he saw a picture," I said, talking fast. "Someone sent him a fake picture of you with another man. He thinks you cheated." Sloan's face went white. She looked at Kendrick, tears welling up in her eyes again. "Ken, no. You know me. Look at me. I am your Sloan. I would never hurt you." But it was too late. The logic loop in his brain had already closed. Sloan equals liar. Liar equals danger. Danger must be removed. Kendrick grabbed a heavy glass vase from the shelf. He held it up like a weapon. His hand was trembling violently. "Get out," he sobbed. "Get out, or I will make the noise stop." I knew what that meant. He was threatening to hurt us or himself to stop the emotional noise in his head. Sloan looked at me. She saw the fear in my eyes. She knew she had lost him. "I will go," she whispered. Her voice broke. "I will go, Ken. Just put the vase down." She turned and ran out of the room. I heard the front door slam. Kendrick dropped the vase. It did not break on the carpet, but it rolled away with a hollow sound. He slid down the wall, pulling his knees to his chest. He started rocking, back and forth, back and forth. He began reciting the Fibonacci sequence, numbers tumbling out of his mouth as he tried to rebuild the order that had just been destroyed. I stood there in the middle of the wreckage, the broken iPad, the spilled tea, the shattered trust. I realized then that we were fighting a different kind of enemy. Delphine did not just want the money. She was willing to lobotomize her own son to get it. She knew exactly which wires to cut in his brain. She knew that by taking away Sloan, she was taking away his translator, his anchor, his bridge to the world. She had isolated him. First, she destroyed my reputation, so I could not protect him legally. Now she had destroyed his marriage, so Sloan could not protect him emotionally. He was alone, just like he was when he was 4 years old. I knelt down next to him, but I did not touch him. I knew I could not fix this with a wrench. I watched my son counting numbers in the dark, and I felt a cold resolve settle over me. Delphine thought she had won. She thought that by breaking him, she made him easy to control. But she forgot one thing. She forgot that when you strip everything away from a man, when you take his safety, his love and his peace, you do not leave him empty. You leave him with nothing but rage. And Kendrick Hayes was about to show her that his rage was not silent. The neon sign outside the bar buzzed with the sound of a dying insect. It was a dive bar on the edge of the industrial district, the kind of place where men went to drink away their paychecks and forget their names. The floor was sticky with spilled beer, and the air smelled of stale smoke and regret. I sat in the darkest booth in the back, my hands wrapped around a glass of water I had no intention of drinking. On the seat next to me was a thick brown envelope. Inside was $50,000 in cash. It was my life savings. It was every dollar I had squirreled away in the coffee can in the garage, every extra shift I had worked at the lube shop, every penny I had scraped together for an emergency. I looked at my hands. The grease was permanently etched into the lines of my palms. These were hands that built things, hands that fixed things, and now I was using them to do something that made me sick to my stomach. I was about to pay a bribe. I was about to pay a ransom to the man who stole my wife just so he would leave my son alone. The door opened, letting in a slice of street lamp light. Gavin walked in. He looked like a peacock in a pigsty. He was wearing a suit that cost more than the bar tab of everyone in the room combined. He spotted me and smirked. He walked over, his Italian leather shoes clicking on the linoleum floor. He slid into the booth opposite me, wrinkling his nose at the smell. "You picked a charming spot, Vernon," he said, brushing an imaginary speck of dust off his lapel. "I suppose this is your natural habitat." I did not rise to the bait. I pushed the envelope across the scarred wooden table. "Take it," I said, my voice low. "There is $50,000 in there. It is all I have. Take it and convince Delphine to drop the lawsuit. Go back to whatever rock you crawled out from." Gavin looked at the envelope. He did not reach for it. He just stared at it with a look of amusement. He reached out with one manicured finger and lifted the flap. He saw the stacks of used bills. He let the flap fall back down. 50,000, he repeated. He leaned back in the booth and laughed. It was not a happy laugh. It was the sound of a man who found a penny on the sidewalk. "You think $50,000 is going to fix this?" he asked, shaking his head. "Vernon, you really are a simple man, aren't you? You think this is about greed. You think we are just trying to get a little extra spending money." He leaned forward, his face suddenly serious. His eyes were bloodshot. I saw a desperation there that matched my own. I owe people money, Vernon. Bad people. The kind of people who do not send lawyer letters. They send guys with baseball bats. I owe them $500,000. And the interest is compounding every day. 50 grand would not even buy me a week of safety. My stomach turned. So that was it. Delphine did not come back for love. She came back because her new husband had gambled away their lives. "So you are using my son as your piggy bank," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "You are going to destroy his life to pay off your bookie." Gavin shrugged. "He is sitting on nearly $2 million, Vernon. And that is just the start. The kid is a factory. He paints, we sell. It is a simple business model. Delphine controls the trust, I manage the investments, and the debt goes away. Everyone wins. Well, except you." He reached for my water glass, took a sip, and grimaced. "You are pathetic," he sneered. "Look at you. You are 68 years old. You live in a house that is falling apart. You drive a car that should be in a scrapyard. You are nothing but a dirty mechanic, Vernon. You have grease under your fingernails and oil in your veins. You were never good enough for Delphine. That is why she left. She wanted a man, not a laborer." I felt the heat rising in my chest. It started in my belly and spread to my shoulders. It was a familiar heat. It was the same heat I felt when I saw the bruising on Kendrick's arm after he hit himself. She left because she was weak, I said through gritted teeth. She left because she could not handle the hard work of love. Gavin laughed again, louder this time. A few people at the bar turned to look. She left because she was bored, Vernon. And frankly, I do not blame her. And now she is going to take the boy back. And do you know what we are going to do with him? We are not going to coddle him like you do. We are going to put him in a facility, a nice quiet place upstate where they have doctors to make sure he stays productive. No more tantrums, no more sensory meltdowns, just paint and medication. We will turn him into the gold mine he was meant to be. The image of Kendrick locked in a room, drugged into submission, painting picture after picture for this man to sell, hit me like a physical blow. The world narrowed down to the face of the man sitting across from me. I forgot the plan. I forgot the lawyer's advice. I forgot that I was 68 years old. I stood up. "You will not touch him," I roared. Gavin looked up at me, his eyes mocking. "Or what, old man? What are you going to do? Fix my transmission?" I did not think. I just moved. My right hand, the hand that had tightened bolts and hammered steel for 50 years, clenched into a fist. I swung with everything I had. My knuckles connected with the bridge of his nose. There was a sickening crunch, the sound of cartilage breaking. Gavin's head snapped back. Blood sprayed across the table, splattering onto the brown envelope. He howled in pain, clutching his face. He fell out of the booth, crashing onto the dirty floor. I stood over him, breathing hard, my hand throbbing. For a second, I felt a surge of satisfaction. I had silenced the voice that threatened my son. But then Gavin looked up. Blood was pouring down his chin, ruining his expensive shirt. But he was not looking at me with fear. He was looking at me with triumph. He spat out a mouthful of blood and grinned, his teeth stained red. "Got you," he wheezed. Before I could process what he meant, the room was bathed in red and blue light. Sirens wailed right outside the door. They were loud, too close. The door of the bar burst open. Police officers swarmed in, guns drawn. "Police, get down on the ground," someone screamed. I froze. I looked at Gavin. I looked at the cops. And then I understood. He knew I would hit him. He had pushed me until I did. He had the police waiting around the corner. This was not a negotiation. It was an ambush. "Get down on the ground now," the officer yelled again, pointing a taser at my chest. Slowly, painfully, I dropped to my knees on the sticky floor. I put my hands behind my head. The officer rushed forward, kicking my legs apart and slamming my face into the floor. I tasted dust and beer. I felt the cold steel of handcuffs ratcheting tight around my wrists. Gavin was helped up by another officer. He was holding a napkin to his nose, acting the victim perfectly. "He asked me to meet him here, officer." Gavin cried, his voice thick with fake terror. "He tried to bribe me. When I refused, he attacked me. He is a violent man. He is dangerous." I tried to speak, to tell them about the gambling debt, about the threats, but an officer pressed a knee into my back, knocking the wind out of me. "Vernon Hayes, you are under arrest for assault and battery," the officer recited. As they dragged me out of the bar past the staring patrons and the flashing lights, I saw Gavin standing by the ambulance. A paramedic was tending to his nose. He locked eyes with me one last time. He held up a piece of paper the officer had given him. It was an emergency protective order. I knew what it meant without reading it. It meant I was legally documented as a violent threat. It meant Delphine now had the perfect weapon to strip me of my rights. But worst of all, it meant that I could not go home. I could not go within 500 feet of the victim or his immediate family. Delphine was his wife. That made her immediate family. And Kendrick was in her custody. The realization hit me harder than the police officer's knee. By throwing that punch, I had not just broken Gavin's nose. I had broken the only shield standing between my son and the wolves. I was going to jail, and Kendrick was going to be alone with the people who wanted to sell him for parts. I sat in the back of the squad car, watching the rain streak against the glass. The brown envelope with my life savings was still on the table in the bar. Gone. Everything was gone. And as the car pulled away, I whispered the only thing I could think of. "I am sorry, Ken. Daddy is sorry." But the only answer was the wail of the siren, taking me further and further away from the boy who needed me. The consequences of my anger arrived on a piece of government stationery delivered by a bailiff who looked like he would rather be anywhere else. I was sitting on the metal cot in the holding cell, nursing my bruised hand when Cohen walked in. He did not look angry. He looked defeated. He sat down on the bench across from me and placed the document between us. It was a temporary emergency order. The judge had looked at the photos of Gavin's broken nose. He had looked at the police report describing me as belligerent, and he had made the only decision the law allows in a situation that looks like domestic violence. He granted Delphine temporary custody of Kendrick pending a full psychiatric evaluation of the family dynamic. "You played right into their hands," Vernon Cohen said, his voice tired. "You gave them exactly what they needed. They painted you as a violent, unstable old man who cannot control his temper. And now the court agrees. They are moving Kendrick today." I felt the blood drain from my face. Today. I stood up, gripping the bars of the cell. "Where are they taking him?" I asked, my voice cracking. "To a state-licensed assessment facility," Cohen said. "It is neutral ground. Or at least that is what the judge calls it. But we both know Delphine picked it. It is a place called Serenity Hills. I knew Serenity Hills. It was a warehouse for the unwanted. It was where families parked their elderly parents and their difficult children when they did not want to deal with them anymore. It was loud. It was chaotic. It was everything that destroyed Kendrick's mind. "Get me out of here," I pleaded. "I need to be there. I need to explain it to him. If they just show up and grab him, he will think I abandoned him. He will think I am just like her." Cohen nodded. "I have posted your bail. You are free to go home, Vernon, but you cannot interfere. The police will be there to enforce the transfer. If you touch anyone, if you so much as raise your voice, they will arrest you for violating the protective order and you will lose him forever. Do you understand me? You have to stand there and watch them take your son and you have to do nothing." I drove home breaking every speed limit in the city. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I prayed that I would get there before them. I prayed that I would have 5 minutes, just 5 minutes to hold my boy and tell him that this was part of a plan, even though I had no plan. I turned onto my street and my heart stopped. The lights were already flashing. 2 police cruisers were parked in my driveway. A white van with the Serenity Hills logo was blocking the garage. I slammed on the brakes and jumped out of the car before it even stopped rolling. I ran toward the house. The front door was open. I heard the screaming before I saw anything. It was not a normal scream. It was the sound of an animal caught in a trap. It was a high-pitched, continuous wail that shredded the air. "Kendrick." I sprinted up the walkway. A police officer stepped in front of me, his hand on his holster. "Mr. Hayes, step back," he ordered. "We are executing a court order." I ignored him. I looked past his shoulder into the living room. 2 large orderlies dressed in white scrubs were trying to pull Kendrick off the floor. Kendrick was clinging to the leg of the heavy oak coffee table. His fingers were white. His face was buried in the carpet. He was screaming into the wool, screaming my name over and over again. "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy." Delphine was standing by the fireplace. She was wearing sunglasses inside the house. She was not helping. She was holding a handkerchief to her nose, looking disgusted by the scene. "Get him up," she snapped at the orderlies. "He is just being dramatic. Drag him if you have to." One of the orderlies, a man with thick arms, grabbed Kendrick by the waist and yanked him backward. Kendrick's fingernails dug into the wood of the table. I heard the sound of them tearing. I saw blood smear on the oak. "Stop it!" I roared, trying to push past the cop. "You are hurting him. He is autistic. He does not understand." The cop shoved me back hard. I stumbled, but I kept my eyes on my son. Kendrick looked up. He saw me. His eyes were wide, filled with a terror that I will see in my nightmares until the day I die. He reached a hand out toward me, his bloody fingers grasping at the air. "Daddy, help! Unsafe! Unsafe!" I lunged forward again. I could not help it. My brain knew the legal consequences, but my heart only knew that my child was calling for me. The officer grabbed my arm and twisted it behind my back. He slammed me against the door frame. I felt the cold metal of handcuffs snapping onto my wrist for the second time in 24 hours. "You were warned, Mr. Hayes," the officer said into my ear. I struggled against the cuffs, tears streaming down my face. "I am not hurting anyone," I sobbed. "Just let me talk to him, please, just let me calm him down." But they did not listen. The orderlies lifted Kendrick off the ground. He kicked and thrashed, knocking over a lamp. He was a big man, strong from years of lifting canvases, but against 2 trained professionals, he had no chance. They dragged him toward the door. His feet dragged on the carpet, leaving a trail of scuff marks. He looked at me one last time as they hauled him past the porch. He stopped screaming. He just looked at me. And in that silence, I saw something break inside him. He stopped fighting. His body went limp. He looked at me with a profound betrayal. He thought I was letting them do this. He thought I was standing there and watching him be taken away because I wanted him to go. "I am sorry, Ken," I screamed, my voice breaking. "I love you. I am coming for you. Daddy is coming." They shoved him into the back of the white van. I heard the lock click shut. It sounded like a gunshot. Delphine walked out of the house. She stepped over my foot as I knelt on the porch, restrained by the officer. She stopped and lowered her sunglasses. She looked at my handcuffs and then at the van. "You should have taken the 50,000, Vernon," she said coldly. "Now you have nothing." She got into her car and drove away, following the van. The officer pulled me up. Now that the van was gone, the tension in his grip loosened. He looked at me with something resembling pity. "I am going to release you, Mr. Hayes," he said, unlocking the cuffs. "But if you follow that van, I will have to arrest you. Stay here." He walked away, leaving me standing alone on the porch. My wrists were bruised. My heart was shattered. The house was silent again, but it was a dead silence. The soul of the house was gone. I sank down onto the steps and buried my face in my hands. I had failed. I had promised his dying mother that I would always keep him safe, and I had just watched him be dragged away bleeding and terrified. I felt a darkness closing in on me, a despair so heavy I could not breathe. Then I felt a hand on my shoulder. I looked up. It was Sloane. I'd forgotten she was there. She had been standing in the corner of the living room the whole time, silent and unmoving. Her face was pale and her eyes were red, but she was not crying anymore. She looked like a ghost. She sat down next to me on the cold concrete steps. She did not hug me. She did not offer empty words of comfort. She leaned in close, her lips brushing against my ear. "Vernon, listen to me," she whispered. Her voice was sharp steel wrapped in velvet. I shook my head. "It is over, Sloane. They took him. He hates me." "No!" she hissed, grabbing my arm with surprising strength. "Listen to me." This had to happen. I pulled back, looking at her like she was crazy. "What are you talking about?" Sloane looked around to make sure the police were gone. She lowered her voice even further. "Kendrick knew they were coming," she said. "Before the orderlies grabbed him, he slipped something into my pocket, and he told me to tell you something." I stared at her. "What?" She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. It was a receipt from the art supply store. On the back, in Kendrick's shaky handwriting, were a series of numbers, coordinates, and 3 words. "Let me handle it." Sloane looked me in the eye. "He is not a child, Vernon. We have spent 20 years protecting him from the world. But we forgot that he observes everything. He knew Delphine would not stop until she had him physically. So he let her take him. Why, I asked, my mind reeling. Why would he go to that hellhole? Because Sloane whispered, a dark smile touching her lips. "That is where the evaluation happens. That is where the court-appointed doctors will interview him. And Kendrick has been preparing for this interview for a week. He is not going there as a victim. He is going there as a Trojan horse." She stood up and brushed the dust off her skirt. "Plan B is active, Vernon. Now get up. We have work to do. We need to find the tax records for the trust. If Kendrick is going to blow up the building from the inside, we need to make sure the fire spreads to Delphine's bank account on the outside." I looked at the empty driveway where the van had disappeared. I thought about the look in Kendrick's eyes. Maybe it was not betrayal. Maybe it was focus. Maybe he went limp, not because he gave up, but because he was saving his energy for the real fight. I stood up. My knees were shaking, but I stood up. "What do you need me to do?" I asked. Sloane handed me the car keys. "Drive," she said. "We are going to see the IRS." The brochure for Serenity Hills featured a stone fountain and a smiling woman doing yoga on a green lawn. It promised a holistic approach to mental wellness. It promised dignity. But the reality was a concrete block building on the edge of an industrial park surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Inside it did not smell like lavender and hope. It smelled of industrial-strength bleach, boiled cabbage, and stale urine. It was a warehouse for the unwanted. It was a place where families stored their elderly parents and their difficult children when they became too much of a burden to keep at home. And this was where my son spent his first night away from me in 20 years. I know what happened inside those walls because we subpoenaed the security footage later. I watched the tapes. I sat in a dark room and watched every second of my son's torture. I saw them lead him down a long, flickering hallway. The fluorescent lights buzzed with a frequency that I knew sounded like a drill in Kendrick's ears. He was walking stiffly, his arms pinned to his sides, his eyes fixed on the floor tiles. They did not take him to a therapy room. They took him to room 304. It was not a room. It was a cell. There was a metal bed bolted to the floor with a thin plastic mattress. There was a stainless steel toilet in the corner. The window was reinforced with wire mesh. The walls were painted a suffocating beige that was peeling in the corners. There were no sensory toys, no weighted blanket, no noise-canceling headphones. They had stripped him of everything that made him feel human. The orderly shoved him inside and closed the heavy door. The lock clicked with a sound of finality. Kendrick stood in the center of the room. He did not move. He did not rock. He just stood there vibrating with a silent terror that radiated off the screen. Then the door opened again. But it was not a doctor. It was Delphine. She was not wearing her fur coat anymore. She was wearing a sharp business suit. She did not look like the weeping mother from the art gallery. Her face was hard. Her eyes were cold. She looked around the room with a sneer of disgust, but not on Kendrick's behalf. She was disgusted that she had to be in such a cheap place. She closed the door behind her. There were no reporters here, no cameras except the grainy black and white one in the corner of the ceiling. She could finally drop the mask. She walked over to the bed and sat down, crossing her legs. She looked at Kendrick, who was still standing like a statue. "Sit down," she ordered. Kendrick did not move. He did not even blink. "I said sit down," she snapped, her voice echoing off the bare walls. When he did not respond, she stood up and marched over to him. She grabbed his chin, forcing him to look at her. "You are going to stop this act right now," she hissed. "I know you can hear me. I know you understand every word. Your father coddled you for 20 years. He let you play the victim. But I am not him. I am not going to wipe your nose and tell you it is okay. We have a business to run." She let go of his face. She reached into a large tote bag she had brought with her. She pulled out a handful of cheap brushes and a set of student-grade acrylic paints, the kind you buy at a dollar store. She threw them onto the metal bed. They clattered loudly. "I brought you supplies," she said. "You have a commission due on Friday. The gallery called me. They said the client is waiting." Kendrick looked at the cheap tubes of paint. To an artist who works with pigments imported from Italy, seeing those synthetic colors was an insult. To an autistic man who needed specific textures to function, it was a mockery. She pulled out a canvas board and propped it up against the wall. "Paint," she commanded, pointing at the blank white square. "Paint something colorful, something happy. The market likes happy." Kendrick did not move. He stared at the wall just above her left shoulder. He was doing what he always did when the world became too hostile. He was retreating inward. He was shutting down the inputs. Delphine waited for a minute. Then two. The silence stretched tight like a rubber band. "Pick up the brush," she screamed, suddenly kicking the bed frame. Kendrick flinched. A tiny movement, but he did not reach for the brush. "You think you are special?" she yelled, pacing around the small room. "You think because you sold one painting you are a genius. You are nothing without me. You are a broken machine, and I am the only one who knows how to fix you. Your father is gone, Kendrick. He is in jail. He abandoned you just like I knew he would. You belong to me now." She got right in his face again. "We have a debt to pay. Do you understand? Gavin owes people money. A lot of money. And you are going to pay it. You are going to paint until your fingers bleed if you have to. I do not care if you sleep. I do not care if you eat. You are going to produce inventory." She grabbed his hand and tried to force the paintbrush into his fingers. Kendrick's hand went limp. The brush fell to the floor. Delphine slapped him. It was not a hard slap, but it was sharp. On the security tape, I saw Kendrick's head snap to the side. I saw him touch his cheek. "Fine," she spat. "Be stubborn. You will get hungry eventually. And when you do, you will paint." She turned and walked out, slamming the door behind her. Kendrick stood alone in the silence. He looked at the cheap paints on the bed. He looked at the brush on the floor. He did not pick them up. He walked over to the corner of the room and sat down on the cold linoleum. He pulled his knees to his chest, but he did not cry. He just stared at the wall with a frightening intensity. Night came. The lights in the facility dimmed, but they never went out completely. The hallway light cast long prison bar shadows across the floor of room 304. On the screen, I saw Kendrick move. It was 3 in the morning. He stood up slowly. He walked over to the pile of art supplies Delphine had left. He ignored the paints. He ignored the brushes. He reached for a small stick of charcoal that had fallen out of the box. He walked to the wall opposite the bed, the wall that was visible to the security camera. He started to write. He did not draw a landscape. He did not draw a face. He drew lines, straight vertical lines, then horizontal lines. He was building a grid. Delphine must have been watching from the monitor in the nurse's station, or maybe she came back to check on her prisoner. The door opened again. She stood there in the doorway, looking tired and angry. "What are you doing?" she asked, stepping into the room. Kendrick did not stop. The charcoal scratched against the plaster. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Delphine walked closer, squinting at the wall. "I told you to paint a picture," she said. "What is this garbage? You are ruining the wall. They are going to charge me for that." She grabbed his shoulder and spun him around. "Look at me," she demanded. "Stop playing with the wall and make me something I can sell." Kendrick looked at her, and for the first time since she arrived, he smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was a cold, mechanical smile. It was the smile of a chess player who sees mate in 3 moves. He stepped aside, revealing what he had written. Delphine looked at it. To her, it looked like the scribbles of a madman. Columns of numbers, strange symbols, brackets and percentages. It covered 4 feet of the wall. "You are insane," she whispered, stepping back. "You are actually insane. My son is a retard who writes gibberish on the walls." She laughed, a harsh, cruel sound. "Go ahead," she said, waving her hand at the wall. "Write your nonsense. Tomorrow the doctors will see this and they will lock you up forever. And then I will have power of attorney for life. You are digging your own grave, idiot." She left him there alone with his wall of numbers. But I sat in that viewing room watching the tape, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I paused the video. I zoomed in on the wall. I am uneducated. I am a mechanic. But I managed the books for my auto shop for 30 years, and Sloan ran a gallery. We knew numbers. Those were not scribbles. Kendrick had drawn a perfect replica of a ledger. On the left column, he had written dates, July 2004 to July 2024. In the middle column, he had written hours, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. In the right column, he had written a rate, $45 per hour, and at the bottom, underlined 3 times with the charcoal stick, was a total. It was a bill. Delphine thought he was losing his mind. She thought the pressure had broken his brain. She did not realize that while she was screaming about art, Kendrick was doing math. He was calculating the cost of abandonment. He was calculating the retroactive salary of a specialized caregiver. He was building the trap. And as I watched him on the screen standing in the dark next to his calculations, I realized Sloan was right. He was not a victim in a cell. He was an architect in his office. And he was designing the blueprint for his mother's destruction. He put the charcoal down. He lay down on the thin mattress and closed his eyes. He went to sleep instantly. It was the sleep of a man who had finished his work for the day. Outside the facility, I was sitting in my car with Sloan going over tax codes. Inside, Kendrick was writing the invoice. The pincer movement had begun, and Delphine, blinded by her greed, did not see the jaws closing around her. The courtroom smelled of lemon polish and old lies. It was a smell I had grown to hate over the last 3 weeks, but today the scent was suffocating. I sat at the defendant's table, my hands folded on top of the scarred wood. My knuckles were still swollen from punching Gavin, but I kept them hidden. I did not want the judge to see the violence in my hands. I wanted him to see what I was about to show him. A broken old man, a defeated father, a relic who had run out of gas. Opposite me, Delphine and Gavin looked like royalty. Delphine was wearing a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than my car. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun that showed off her diamond earrings. She sat with her back straight, radiating the confidence of a woman who has already counted the money before the check has cleared. Gavin sat next to her, nursing his broken nose, which was covered by a small, discreet bandage. He looked at me with a smirk that was sharp enough to cut glass. He tapped his fingers on his leather briefcase, a rhythmic sound that echoed the ticking of the clock on the wall. They thought this was a coronation. They thought I was here to beg. Judge Harrison entered the room in a swirl of black robes. He was a stern man with a face carved from granite. He did not look at me. He looked at the file in front of him. the file that contained the psychiatric evaluation from Serenity Hills. "We are here to make a final ruling on the matter of the Hayes conservatorship," Judge Harrison said, his voice booming without a microphone. "I have reviewed the emergency report submitted by Dr. Aris from the evaluation facility. It is concerning." Dr. Aris was called to the stand. He was a small man with shifting eyes and a sweat stain on his collar. Delphine had chosen him well. He was the kind of doctor who saw patients as billable hours, not human beings. "Dr. Aris, please summarize your findings for the court," Delphine's lawyer said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. Dr. Aris cleared his throat. He did not look at Kendrick, who was sitting next to me staring at the table. "The subject, Kendrick Hayes, displays severe cognitive regression," Dr. Aris read from his notes. "During his stay at Serenity Hills, he was nonverbal for 90% of the time. He exhibited obsessive-compulsive behaviors, specifically defacing facility property with nonsensical scribbles. He showed no interest in self-care or social interaction. It is my professional opinion that Mr. Hayes lacks the capacity to manage his own affairs or make financial decisions. He requires a permanent guardian to ensure his safety and the safety of his estate. I listened to him describe my son as a vegetable. I listened to him twist Kendrick's focus into madness. The scribbles he talked about were the complex calculations Kendrick had written on the wall. The silence he mentioned was Kendrick's way of surviving the sensory hell they put him in. But I did not object. I did not slam my fist on the table. I just sat there, shoulders slumped, staring at my hands. "Thank you, Dr. Aris," the judge said. He turned his gaze to me. "Mr. Hayes, your counsel has filed a motion to dismiss the conservatorship. You claim that your son is capable and that you have been his primary caregiver for 20 years. Do you have any evidence to refute Dr. Aris's findings?" This was the moment. This was the script we had rehearsed in the dark. Cohen nudged me under the table. It was time. I stood up slowly. I made sure my chair scraped loudly against the floor. I let my body sag. I let the exhaustion of the last 20 years show on my face. I did not look like the man who punched Gavin. I looked like a man who had been crushed by the weight of the world. "Your Honor," I said, my voice trembling just enough. I looked at Delphine. She was watching me closely, her eyes narrowing. She was waiting for the fight. She was waiting for the anger. "I have no evidence," I said softly. The room went silent. Even the court reporter stopped typing. "Excuse me, Mr. Hayes," the judge asked, leaning forward. I looked down at Kendrick. He was wearing a suit I had bought him 5 years ago. It was a little tight in the shoulders. He looked small, vulnerable. "I said I have no evidence, Your Honor." I repeated louder this time. "I am a mechanic. I fix cars. I do not know about psychiatric evaluations. I do not know about trust funds and asset management." I took a deep breath, letting a tear leak out of my eye. It was a real tear, but it was not for the reason they thought. "I am 68 years old. Your Honor, I am tired. My heart is not good. I have spent every day of the last 2 decades worrying about this boy. I have fought for him. I have protected him. But maybe Dr. Aris is right. Maybe I have been holding him back. Maybe I am just a selfish old man who is afraid of being alone." I saw Gavin's smirk widen into a grin. He nudged Delphine. She looked shocked at first, but then a slow, greedy smile spread across her face. They were buying it. They were swallowing the bait, hook, line, and sinker. My wife left 20 years ago because she said I could not provide the life Kendrick needed. I continued wiping my eyes with a rough hand. She has come back now. She has money. She has resources. She has a husband who knows about finance. Maybe it is time for me to step aside. Maybe it is time for Kendrick to have a mother. I looked directly at Delphine. "You win, Delphine," I said. "Take him. Take the money. Take the burden. I cannot do it anymore." I sat down heavily, burying my face in my hands. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Delphine's lawyer looked stunned. He had prepared for a war, and the enemy had just surrendered before the first shot. Judge Harrison banged his gavel. "Order. Order in the court." He looked at me with something like pity. "Mr. Hayes, are you withdrawing your objection to the conservatorship?" "Yes, Your Honor," I mumbled into my hands. The judge sighed. He looked at the papers in front of him. "Very well. Given the biological father's withdrawal and the medical evidence presented, it seems the court has a clear path forward. But before I rule, I must follow protocol. The subject is present, Mr. Kendrick Hayes. Kendrick stood up. The movement was sharp and precise. He did not slouch. He did not rock. He stood up straight, his spine aligned like a steel rod. He adjusted his cuffs. Delphine looked at him. She looked annoyed. "Sit down, Kendrick," she hissed. "The judge is talking." Kendrick ignored her. He looked directly at the judge. He made eye contact. For an autistic person, this is incredibly difficult, but Kendrick held it. "Your Honor," Kendrick said. His voice was not the mumbled whisper everyone expected. It was clear. It was calm. It sounded like the voice of a man who had spent a week in silence refining his argument. "I would like to address the court regarding the transfer of authority." The judge looked surprised. "Go ahead, young man." "I agree with my father," Kendrick said. He did not look at me. He kept his eyes on the judge. He is old. He is tired. He does not understand the complexity of the financial future that lies ahead of me. The Hayes Art Trust has grown beyond his capabilities. Delphine gasped. She covered her mouth with her hand. This was better than she could have dreamed. Her retarded son was actually agreeing with her. "I require a guardian who understands the value of money," Kendrick continued. "Someone who is willing to do whatever it takes to maximize the assets. My mother has proven that she is that person. She returned after 20 years specifically to manage my finances. She has shown great determination. She placed me in a facility to ensure I was compliant. She is the appropriate manager for the estate." He turned to Delphine. He looked her up and down. His expression was unreadable. It was a mask of perfect neutrality. "I accept your guardianship, Mother," he said. "I want you to have full legal control over the Hayes Art Trust and all its associated liabilities." Liabilities. The word hung in the air for a second, but nobody caught it. Not the judge, not the lawyer, and certainly not Delphine, who was too busy visualizing the balance of his bank account. Judge Harrison nodded. He looked impressed. "It seems the family has reached a consensus. This is highly unusual, but it simplifies matters." He picked up his pen. "Mrs. Delphine Hayes Miller, the court grants your petition for permanent conservatorship over Kendrick Hayes and the Hayes Art Trust. You are hereby granted full power of attorney and full fiduciary responsibility effective immediately." He signed the document. The scratch of the pen on the paper sounded like a key turning in a lock. Delphine stood up. She did not hug Kendrick. She turned to Gavin and they high-fived. It was a gross display of victory. They hugged each other laughing. "We did it," Gavin whispered loud enough for me to hear. "We are rich." The judge handed the stamped order to the bailiff who brought it to Delphine. She snatched it from his hand. She held it like a trophy. She looked at me, her eyes shining with malice. "Thank you, Vernon," she said. "Don't worry. We will send you a postcard from the Hamptons." I slowly lifted my head from my hands. The tears were gone. The exhaustion was gone. I looked at her and I allowed myself a small, cold smile. "You should read the fine print, Delphine," I said softly. She ignored me. She turned to Kendrick. "Come on," she said, snapping her fingers. "Let's go. We have a bank transfer to make." Kendrick did not move. He reached under the table and pulled out a thick black binder that he had brought with him. He placed it on the table with a heavy thud. "Actually," Mother Kendrick said, opening the binder, "before we go to the bank, we need to address the first item of business for the new conservator." "What are you talking about?" Delphine asked, stopping mid-stride. Kendrick pointed to the document she was holding. "You are now the legal owner of the trust," he said. "That means you own the assets. But as my father tried to tell you, it also means you own the debts." He slid the binder across the table toward her. "I have prepared the first invoice," he said. "It is past due." Delphine looked at the binder. She looked at Gavin. Gavin stopped smiling. "What invoice?" she asked, her voice faltering. "The invoice for 20 years of specialized care," Kendrick said, his voice devoid of emotion. "And the invoice for the termination of the previous manager." Delphine laughed nervously. "You are joking." "I never joke," Kendrick said. And in that moment the trap snapped shut. The room felt suddenly cold. Delphine looked at the binder like it was a bomb. And she was right. It was a bomb that had been ticking for 20 years, and she had just decided to cut the wrong wire. The bailiff placed the document on the table in front of Delphine. It was a single sheet of heavy bond paper that represented the total surrender of my rights as a father. It was the legal key to the kingdom. Delphine did not look at me. She did not look at the judge. Her eyes were locked on the attachment at the back of the file. It was the asset schedule. I could see her pupils dilate as she scanned the line items, the bank accounts, the residuals from the gallery sales, the estimated value of the current inventory. and right at the top, the number that had started this war. $1.8 million. She reached into her purse and pulled out a gold fountain pen. It was a showy thing, the kind of pen people use when they want to look important. She uncapped it with a sharp click. Her hand did not shake. There was no hesitation, no moment of moral pause where a mother might wonder if she was doing the right thing by stealing her son's autonomy. There was only greed. Pure, distilled greed. She signed her name with a flourish. Delphine Hayes Miller. The ink was dark and wet. She signed it quickly, as if she was afraid the money might evaporate if she took too long. Then she slid the paper over to the judge. Judge Harrison picked up his stamp. He exhaled a breath that smelled of stale coffee and boredom. To him, this was just another administrative task. Another family dispute settled. Another file to clear off his desk before lunch. He did not know he was presiding over execution. He pressed the stamp down. Thud. Approved. The sound echoed in the quiet courtroom. It sounded like a heavy door slamming shut. Delphine let out a breath she had been holding. She turned to Gavin. They did not kiss, but they squeezed each other's hands under the table. I saw the muscles in Gavin's jaw relax. He was doing the math in his head. He was subtracting his gambling debts from the number on that paper and realizing he still had enough left over for a sports car. The judge closed the file. "The court thanks Mr. Hayes for his cooperation in this difficult transition," he said, looking at me without really seeing me. "Mrs. Miller, you are now the court-appointed conservator. You have full legal authority." Delphine stood up. She smoothed her skirt. She looked at me with a triumphant sneer. "Thank you." "Your Honor," she said, "I promise to take better care of his finances than his father ever could." She reached for her purse, ready to leave, ready to go to the bank, ready to start spending. But then a sound cut through the room. It was the sound of a microphone being adjusted, a sharp, high-pitched scratch of feedback that made everyone wince. We all turned. Kendrick was standing up. He had pulled the heavy gooseneck microphone across the table toward him. Usually he hated microphones. He hated the way they amplified the sound of his own breathing. But he was gripping this one with a steady hand. Delphine frowned. "Come on, Kendrick," she snapped. "We are leaving." Kendrick did not move. He did not look at her. He looked directly at the court reporter, who was already packing up her typing machine. "I would like to make a statement for the record," Kendrick said. His voice was clear. It was deep. It was steady. For 20 years I had known my son as a boy of few words. He spoke in fragments. He spoke in whispers. He spoke in echolalia, repeating phrases he heard on television. When he was stressed, he went mute. But the voice that filled the courtroom now was not the voice of a disabled child. It was the voice of a man. The judge looked up, surprised. "Mr. Hayes, the proceedings are concluded. I am aware, Your Honor," Kendrick said. "I am not contesting the ruling. I am welcoming the new management." He turned his head slowly. The movement was mechanical but fluid. He looked at Delphine. He looked her right in the eyes. There was no fear. There was no avoidance. There was only a terrifying, icy calm. Delphine took a step back. She looked unsettled. She had spent the last month telling the world he was a helpless child. Now he was looking at her like a predator looks at prey. "Welcome to my world, Mother," he said. The words hung in the air. They were simple words, but the way he said them made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. He did not say it with love. He said it the way a spider might welcome a fly to a web. He raised his right hand and snapped his fingers. It was a sharp command. Sloane, who had been sitting quietly in the back row, stood up. She was holding 2 large black briefcases. They were heavy. I could see the strain in her arms as she lifted them. She walked through the swinging gate that separated the gallery from the court. Her heels clicked on the floor with a military rhythm. She did not look at Delphine. She walked straight to the defendant's table and placed the briefcases next to Kendrick. Click, click. She opened the latches. The sound was loud in the silent room. Delphine laughed nervously, a high-pitched titter that sounded out of place. "What is this?" she asked, looking at the judge for support. "Is this some kind of parting gift?" Kendrick did not smile. He reached into the first briefcase. He pulled out a stack of binders. They were thick black binders labeled by year. 2004, 2005, 2006, all the way to 2024. He began to slide them across the table. Slide, thud, slide, thud. He pushed them toward Delphine until they formed a wall between them. "You wanted the estate," Kendrick said, his voice flat and emotionless. You fought for the estate. You lied for the estate. And now the court has given you the estate. He picked up the final binder. It was red. The law of conservatorship is very clear, he continued. It is a total transfer of assets and liabilities. You cannot take the profit without the debt. You cannot take the harvest without paying for the seed. Gavin stood up. His face was pale. What are you talking about, kid? There is no debt. We checked the credit reports. There are no liens on the property. Kendrick ignored him. He opened the red binder. He turned it around so the judge could see. Your Honor, Kendrick said, addressing the bench. As the new conservator, my mother is required to settle all outstanding obligations of the Hayes Art Trust before she can withdraw a single penny for herself. Judge Harrison adjusted his glasses. He looked intrigued. That is correct, Mr. Hayes. Are there outstanding obligations? Kendrick pointed a long finger at the document in the binder. Yes, Your Honor. The trust has a standing contract for specialized 24-hour care and behavioral management, a contract that has been accruing unpaid wages for 20 years. Delphine's face went white. She grabbed the edge of the table. What contract? She whispered. The contract with my father, Kendrick said. Sloane stepped forward. She began to distribute copies of the document to everyone in the room. She handed one to the bailiff. She handed one to the judge. She handed one to Delphine's lawyer, who looked like he had just swallowed a lemon. I watched Sloane work. She was efficient. She was lethal. She handed the last copy to Delphine. Delphine looked down at the paper. Her hands were shaking so hard the paper rattled. This is a fake, she screamed, throwing the paper down. You made this up. Vernon is his father. Fathers do not get paid to raise their children. Kendrick leaned into the microphone. His voice filled the room, drowning out her hysteria. Vernon Hayes is my father, yes. But Vernon Hayes is also a certified specialist in sensory processing disorders. He is a dietary manager, he is a physical therapist, he is a security guard, he is a driver. And according to the contract signed by the trust when I was 18 years old, he is entitled to the market rate for those services, retroactive to the date of my diagnosis. I sat there stunned. I remembered signing a paper when Kendrick turned 18. He had told me it was just a formality for his art business. I never read it. I trusted him. I had no idea he was building a bomb. The judge was reading the contract. He was reading it very carefully. He looked up over his glasses. Mr. Hayes, he said to Kendrick, the hourly rate listed here is $45 an hour for 24 hours a day, including weekends and holidays. That is the standard rate for live-in care for a high-needs adult, Kendrick replied. Actually, Your Honor, it is a discount. The judge pulled out a calculator. He punched in the numbers. 20 years, he muttered, times 365 days, times 24 hours. The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. You could hear the traffic outside. You could hear Gavin's heavy breathing. Judge Harrison looked at the calculator. He blinked. He looked at it again. Delphine looked at the judge. Her arrogance was gone, replaced by a dawning horror. How much, she whispered. The judge cleared his throat. The total outstanding debt for services rendered is $2,365,000. He looked at the asset sheet again. The one with the $1.8 million figure. Mrs. Miller, he said, his voice dry. It appears the estate you have just fought so hard to acquire is insolvent. Insolvent. The word hung there. Delphine looked at the $1.8 million she thought she had won. Then she looked at the $2.3 million she now owed. She looked at Gavin. Gavin looked like he was going to vomit. Wait, she stammered. Wait. That means, Kendrick said, closing the binder with a snap. That means you are negative $500,000. He looked at me then. For the first time all day, he looked at me. And he winked. Happy retirement, Dad, he said. Sloane reached into the second briefcase. She pulled out a stack of invoices. And now, Mother, she said, smiling a smile that did not reach her eyes, let us talk about the interest. The air in the room shifted. It was no longer a courtroom. It was a slaughterhouse. And the wolves who thought they were coming for a feast suddenly realized they were the meal. The silence in Judge Harrison's courtroom was absolute. It was the kind of silence that usually follows a gunshot. The only sound was the rhythmic tapping of the judge's finger on the solar-powered calculator. Tap, tap, tap. Each tap was a nail in the coffin of Delphine's greed. She stood there clutching her alligator skin purse, her knuckles white, her face a mask of confusion that was slowly cracking into panic. Gavin was sweating profusely, wiping his forehead with a silk handkerchief that was already soaked. Sloane stepped forward. She looked like a general surveying a battlefield she had already won. She walked over to the easel where the asset list was displayed. She picked up a thick red marker. She drew a circle around the number $1.8 million. "This is the asset," she said, her voice cool and clinical. "This is the honeypot you came for, Delphine. The painting, the cash, the prestige." Then she drew a line through it, a thick, violent red slash. "But you forgot the first rule of acquisition," Sloane continued, turning to face the trembling woman. "When you acquire a business entity, and make no mistake, the Hayes Art Trust is a business entity, you acquire its history. You do not just inherit the inventory, you inherit the operational costs, you inherit the overhead, and most importantly, you inherit the debt." Delphine found her voice. It was shrill and desperate. "There is no debt," she screamed, looking at the judge. "We ran a credit check. There are no mortgages. There are no loans. This is a trick, Your Honor. They are trying to hide the money." Sloane smiled. It was a terrifying smile. "We did not hide anything," Sloane said. "The debt is internal. It is an operational liability that has been accruing for 20 years. It is called deferred compensation." She opened the second black briefcase. She pulled out a stack of tax forms. IRS Form 1099S, W2S, employment contracts. "You see," Delphine, Sloane said, holding up the papers. "Caring for a high-functioning autistic savant with severe sensory processing disorder is not parenting. It is a job. It is a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week, high-stress occupation. It requires the skills of a nurse, a security guard, a dietitian, a physical therapist, and a crisis negotiator." She walked over to me. She placed a hand on my shoulder. "Vernon Hayes has performed these duties alone since 2004. He gave up his career. He gave up his retirement. He gave up his life. And according to the bylaws of the Hayes Art Trust, written and notarized 5 years ago when Kendrick became a legal adult, the primary caregiver is entitled to fair market compensation." Delphine laughed. It was a manic, broken sound. "You cannot charge for being a father," she spat. "That is ridiculous. No court will uphold that." Judge Harrison looked up from the calculator. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Actually, Mrs. Miller," the judge said, his voice grave, "the contract is legally sound. It was filed with the state 5 years ago. It establishes Mr. Hayes not just as a father, but as a specialized care provider. And given the medical history we just reviewed, given the violent meltdowns and the specific dietary needs described by your own expert, Dr. Aris, the services rendered by Mr. Hayes clearly exceed normal parental duties." The judge looked at Dr. Aris, who was trying to make himself invisible in the back of the room. "Doctor," the judge asked, "what is the current daily rate for a live-in specialist for an adult with Mr. Hayes's profile?" Dr. Aris swallowed hard. He looked at Delphine, then at the judge. "Ah, well, Your Honor," he stammered. "For a 24-hour facility with one-on-one staffing, you are looking at roughly $1,200 a day. Minimum." The judge nodded. He looked back at the calculator. "Mr. Kendrick Hayes has calculated the debt at $45 an hour. That is $1,080 a day. He is actually undercharging the estate." Sloane flipped the page in the binder. "Let us look at the math," she said. Her voice was steady, a drumbeat of doom. 2004 to 2024, 7,300 days, multiplied by $1,080 a day. That comes to a principal debt of $7,884,000. The number hit the room like a physical blow. 7 million. Delphine's knees buckled. She grabbed the edge of the table to keep from falling. However, Sloane continued relentlessly. "Vernon Hayes is a generous man. In the contract, he agreed to cap his salary at a lower rate and defer payment until the trust became solvent. He also forgave the interest for the first 10 years. She pointed to the final number on the spreadsheet. "The adjusted debt approved by the trust board and now legally binding on the conservator is $2.2 million. This is a priority lien. It must be paid before any other expenses. It must be paid before taxes. And it certainly must be paid before the conservator takes a fee." I looked at Delphine. I saw the exact moment her heart stopped beating. She looked at the asset sheet. 1.8 million. She looked at the debt sheet. 2.2 million. She did the math. She was not rich. She was not a millionaire. She was $400,000 in the hole. But surely Delphine stammered, looking at Gavin for help. Surely we can just declare bankruptcy. We can just dissolve the trust. Sloane laughed. A dry, sharp sound. Oh, Delphine, Sloane said, shaking her head. Did you not read the document you just signed, the one the judge just stamped? Sloane picked up the court order. She read from it. The conservator assumes full fiduciary responsibility for the assets and liabilities of the estate. She looked Delphine in the eye. That means personal liability, Delphine. If the trust cannot pay its debts, the conservator pays them. You signed your name. You tied your personal assets to this sinking ship. You do not just owe the trust. You owe Vernon. Gavin let out a sound that was half whimper, half scream. He backed away from Delphine as if she was radioactive. You told me she was rich, he shouted at her. You told me the kid was a gold mine. He is a gold mine! Delphine shrieked, grabbing Gavin's arm. We can sell more paintings. We can make him work. Kendrick stood up again. He closed the binder with a final snap. No, mother, he said softly. We cannot. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, sleek black device. It was a hardware wallet, a cryptocurrency drive. The painting that sold yesterday, Kendrick said. It was not a physical canvas. It was a digital asset, an NFT backed by a smart contract on the blockchain. He held the drive up. The contract requires biometric authentication every 30 days. My thumbprint. If I do not authenticate, the token burns. It deletes itself. The value goes to zero. He looked at his mother with eyes that were as old as the world. I will not authenticate, he said. Delphine screamed. No, you cannot. That is $1.8 million. It is only money, Mother, Kendrick said. You left me for money. You came back for money. Now you will drown in money. He turned to the judge. Your Honor, I refuse to work for this conservator. I will not paint. I will not authenticate. The asset value of the Hayes Art Trust is effectively zero. The judge looked at the chaos erupting in his courtroom. He looked at Delphine, who was hyperventilating. He looked at Gavin, who was trying to sneak out the side door. He looked at me, sitting quietly with my hands folded, and for the first time Judge Harrison smiled. It was a small smile, but it was there. The court finds that the debt is valid, he ruled, slamming his gavel. Mrs. Miller, as the legal conservator, you are hereby ordered to satisfy the lien held by Mr. Vernon Hayes. The amount is $2.2 million. Payment is due immediately. If the trust lacks funds, the court authorizes the seizure of your personal assets to satisfy the judgment. Delphine fell into her chair. She looked at me. Her eyes were wide with horror. She realized the scope of the disaster. She had leveraged everything. She had borrowed money from sharks to pay for lawyers. She had signed guarantees based on this windfall. And now, not only was the windfall gone, but she owed me her house, her car, and everything she owned. Vernon, please, she whispered. Her voice was small, broken. We are family. You cannot do this. I stood up. I walked over to her. I looked down at the woman who had haunted my dreams for 20 years, the woman whose absence had shaped every scar on my heart. I leaned in close so only she could hear me. Family does not leave a note on the fridge, Delphine, I said. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a wrinkled piece of paper. It was the invoice Kendrick had scribbled on the wall of the mental facility. The charcoal was smudged, but the number was clear. I placed it gently on the table in front of her. My son sent you the bill, I said. I suggest you pay it. Gavin tried to run. He actually bolted for the door, but the bailiff was faster. He blocked the exit. Mr. Miller, the bailiff said, there is a gentleman in the back row who would like a word with you. Gavin turned around. Sitting in the back row, hidden in the shadows, was a man in a dark suit. He was not a lawyer. He was looking at his watch. He stood up and smiled a smile full of gold teeth. It was the bookie Gavin owed $500,000 to. Gavin slid down the wall, burying his head in his knees. Delphine looked at her husband, then at her son, then at me. She realized she was alone, completely and utterly alone. The money was a mirage, the power was a trap, and the son she thought was broken had just outsmarted her with a calculator and a silence she never bothered to understand. Sloane closed her briefcases. We accept cashier's checks or wire transfers, she said to Delphine. You have 24 hours before we file the lien on your house. We turned to leave. Kendrick walked between us. He did not look back at his mother. He put his headphones on. He adjusted the volume. And as we walked out of that courtroom, leaving the ruin of Delphine's life behind us, I saw him tapping his fingers against his leg. 1, 2, 3. He was counting. But he wasn't counting numbers anymore. He was counting the beats of his own freedom. The debt was paid. The ghost was exorcised. And for the first time in 20 years, the silence was not empty. It was victorious. Delphine was still clutching the invoice for $2.2 million, like a drowning woman holding onto an anchor. Her face was gray. Her perfect makeup was starting to crack under the strain of a reality she could not comprehend. She looked at the asset sheet where the number $1.8 million was written. It was her lifeline. It was the only thing standing between her and total ruin. But Kendrick was not finished. He stood there holding the small black cryptocurrency drive in his hand. It looked like a harmless piece of plastic. It looked like a USB stick you might find in a junk drawer. But in the modern world, wars are not fought with tanks, they are fought with code. And my son was a general on a digital battlefield that his mother did not even know existed. He took a step toward her. He held the drive up so the light from the courtroom ceiling reflected off its sleek surface. "You think you own a painting," Mother Kendrick said, his voice calm and terrifying. "You think you own a canvas with oil and pigment. You think you can take it to an auction house and sell it to the highest bidder. But you are living in the past." He tapped the drive with his long index finger. "The artwork titled The Chaos of Silence is not a physical object. It is a non-fungible token, an NFT. It lives on the blockchain. The image on the screen is just a ghost. The value is in the code. And I wrote the code myself." Delphine blinked. She looked confused. "It does not matter," she stammered. "It sold for money. Real money." "The buyer paid." "The buyer paid for a smart contract," Kendrick corrected her. "A contract that has a very specific clause written into the metadata. It is called a dead man switch." He turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the value of this asset is tied to the active participation of the creator. To prevent fraud and to ensure authenticity, the smart contract requires biometric verification from me every 30 days. I have to scan my thumbprint on this drive. If I do not, the contract assumes the creator is dead or under duress." "And what happens if you do not scan it?" Judge Harrison asked, leaning forward, fascinated. Kendrick looked back at his mother. A cold smile played on his lips. "If the verification fails, the code executes a burn protocol. The token deletes itself from the blockchain. The ownership certificate dissolves. The asset value drops to zero instantly. It becomes nothing more than a JPEG file that anyone can download for free." Delphine's eyes went wide. She looked at the drive in his hand. She looked at his thumb. "You have to scan it," she whispered. "It is worth millions. You cannot just let it burn." Kendrick closed his hand over the drive. He put it back in his pocket. "I told you, Mother," he said softly. "I do not care about the money. I care about control, and you wanted control. Now you have it. You have control of an asset that requires my cooperation to exist." He paused, letting the silence stretch out until it was painful. "And I will not authenticate." "No," Delphine screamed. She lunged across the table, trying to grab his arm. "You have to, you ungrateful brat. Do it. Do it now." Kendrick did not flinch. He did not move. He just looked at her with eyes that were ancient and weary. "I will not," he repeated. The implications hit the room like a shockwave. In a matter of seconds, the $1.8 million asset that Delphine had signed her life away for had evaporated. She was holding the title to a ghost. She was the proud owner of absolutely nothing. But the nightmare was only beginning. Sloane stepped forward again. She opened the second briefcase. She pulled out a calculator and a thick stack of government forms. "Now let us discuss the tax implications," she said, her voice ringing with professional cheer. Delphine looked at her dazed. "What tax?" she mumbled. "The money is gone. He burned it. There is no money." Sloane shook her head. "Ah, but that is not how the Internal Revenue Service sees it, Delphine. You see, tax law is very specific about the transfer of assets." Sloane held up the court order, the one Delphine had signed 5 minutes ago. The ink was barely dry. "At the moment you signed this document, you accepted the transfer of an asset valued at $1.8 million, Sloane explained. The IRS considers this a taxable event. The fact that the asset value dropped to zero 5 minutes later is unfortunate for you, but it is irrelevant to the government. You accepted the value at the time of transfer. Sloan punched some numbers into the calculator. The gift tax and transfer tax on an estate of this size, combined with the immediate capital gains recognition, falls roughly around 40%. She turned the calculator around so Delphine could see the number. $720,000. Sloan smiled. That is what you owe the IRS, Delphine. And unlike other debts, tax debt cannot be discharged in bankruptcy. And since the trust has no liquid cash because the asset just evaporated, that tax bill falls to you personally. Delphine made a sound like a wounded animal. She looked at the asset sheet. 0. She looked at the debt to me, $2.2 million. She looked at the tax bill, $700,000. She was nearly $3 million in debt. In 10 minutes, she had gone from a wealthy socialite to a destitute woman who would likely spend the rest of her life working to pay off the interest on a fortune she never touched. But she was not the only one suffering. Gavin was sitting next to her, frozen in his chair. His face was a mask of sheer terror. He was not looking at the judge. He was not looking at Delphine. He was looking at his phone, which was vibrating violently on the wooden table. Buzz, buzz, buzz. He looked at the screen. I could see the reflection of a text message. It was short. It was brutal. I am watching you. Time is up. Gavin looked up slowly. He turned his head toward the back of the courtroom. The man in the dark suit, the bookie, was still sitting there. He held up his phone. He pointed to his wrist. Then he ran a finger across his throat. Gavin started to hyperventilate. He realized that his safety net was gone. He had promised the mob that he would pay them today. He had promised them a slice of the Kendrick Hayes fortune. Now there was no fortune. There was only debt. And people like the man in the back row did not accept excuses. They accepted payment, or they took payment in blood. Gavin looked at Delphine. He looked at the woman he had conspired with, the woman he had married for money. And in that moment, whatever twisted love or partnership, they had dissolved completely. He stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. I did not sign anything, he shouted, his voice cracking. Everyone turned to look at him. I did not sign the order, he yelled, pointing a shaking finger at Delphine. She signed it. It is her name on the paper. I am just a consultant. I have nothing to do with this. Delphine looked at him. Her mouth fell open. Gavin, what are you doing? I am leaving. Gavin stammered, backing away from the table. I am leaving you. This is your mess, Delphine. You fix it. I am not going down for this. He grabbed his briefcase. He did not look at her again. He turned and ran toward the side exit of the courtroom. Gavin, come back! Delphine screamed. You coward! You come back here! Gavin reached the door. He threw it open, but he did not get far. 2 uniformed bailiffs were waiting in the hallway. They stepped in front of him, blocking his path. Let me go, Gavin shouted, trying to push past them. I have rights. I have to go. Sir, you cannot leave the courtroom while proceedings are in session. One of the bailiffs said, grabbing his arm. Gavin panicked. He swung his briefcase at the bailiff. It was a weak, desperate flail. The bailiff dodged it easily and pinned Gavin against the wall. Delphine stood up. She was losing her mind. The walls were closing in. The debt, the taxes, the betrayal, the poverty. It was too much for her vanity to handle. She grabbed the asset sheet from the table. She ripped it in half. I do not accept it, she shrieked, tearing the paper into confetti. Take it back. I do not want it. Cancel the order. She threw the pieces of paper at the judge. They fluttered down like snow around the bench. Mrs. Miller, sit down. The judge roared, banging his gavel. No, Delphine screamed. It is a trick. They tricked me. Look at them. She pointed at me. She pointed at Kendrick. They planned this. He is not retarded. He is the devil. Look at him. He is laughing at me. Kendrick was not laughing. He was standing perfectly still, watching the destruction of his mother's sanity with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a chemical reaction. Bailiff, restrain the defendant, the judge ordered. The bailiff, who was not holding Gavin, moved toward Delphine. Don't touch me, she wailed, backing away. She grabbed her heavy alligator purse and swung it wildly. It hit the water pitcher on the table, sending water splashing everywhere. It was chaos. Absolute humiliating chaos. The elegant, wealthy woman who had walked in an hour ago was now a screaming, disheveled mess, throwing water and paper at a judge while her husband was being handcuffed in the doorway. I sat there and I felt a hand on my arm. It was Sloane. She was not smiling anymore. She was just watching. "It is done," she whispered. Delphine was sobbing now, hysterical, broken sobs. The bailiff gently but firmly forced her back into her chair. "You cannot do this to me," she cried, looking at me. "Vernon, help me, please. I am the mother of your child." I stood up slowly. I walked over to the table where she sat, surrounded by the wreckage of her greed. I looked down at her. "You are not a mother, Delphine." I said, my voice low and steady. "You are a biological donor. And you just learned the most expensive lesson of your life." I pointed to the shredded paper on the floor. "You wanted the boy," I said. "You got the boy, but you forgot that the boy comes with the man who raised him, and the man who raised him keeps his receipts." I turned my back on her. I walked back to Kendrick. He looked at me. He took off his headphones. "Did I do it right, Dad?" He asked, his voice quiet and unsure, like a little boy asking about a homework assignment. I put my hand on his shoulder. I felt the solid strength of him. "Yes, son," I said, fighting back tears. "You handled it. You handled it perfectly." Behind us, the judge was issuing orders for asset seizure and contempt of court, but we did not listen. We walked toward the double doors. Vernon Hayes, the mechanic, Sloane Hayes, the warrior, and Kendrick Hayes, the artist who had just painted his masterpiece, using nothing but the law and the truth. The courtroom doors swung open with a heavy thud that sounded like the final gavel of judgment. But it was not the judge who entered. It was a team of federal agents wearing jackets that said FBI. They moved with the precision of a pack of wolves descending on wounded prey. They did not look at me. They did not look at Kendrick. They walked straight to the table where Delphine was sitting amidst the ruins of her scheme. Delphine looked up. Her mascara was running down her cheeks in black rivulets, making her look like a tragic clown. She tried to stand up to regain some shred of dignity, but her legs would not hold her. She collapsed back into the chair, clutching her purse as if it contained the oxygen she needed to breathe. Mrs. Delphine Hayes Miller, the lead agent, announced, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, bank fraud, and identity theft." Delphine shook her head violently. "No, there is a mistake. I am the conservator. The judge just signed the order. I have assets. I have millions." The agent pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The metal glinted cold and hard in the fluorescent light. "We know about the loans, Mrs. Miller. We know that you used the projected value of the Hayes Art Trust to secure $3 million in high-interest loans from offshore lenders last week. You signed affidavits claiming you already had possession of the funds. That is fraud. You spent money you did not have, and you lied to a federally insured bank to get it." I watched as the reality hit her. She had been so sure of her victory, so certain that she could steamroll over her disabled son and his mechanic father, that she had spent the prize money before the race was even finished. She had dug a hole so deep that she could not even see the sky anymore. She looked at me one last time. Her eyes were wild. "Vernon, tell them. Tell them I am good for it. Tell them about the painting." I stood there, my hands resting on the back of Kendrick's chair. I looked at the woman who had left a 4-year-old boy alone in the dark because he was an inconvenience. "The painting is gone, Delphine," I said, my voice quiet but carrying across the room. "The value is 0. You bet on a ghost and you lost." The agent grabbed her wrists. She screamed. It was not a scream of fear. It was a scream of pure rage. She thrashed and kicked, knocking over the heavy oak chair. "Get your hands off me. Do you know who I am? I am a victim. They tricked me. That boy is a monster. He planned this." The agents dragged her toward the door. She dug her heels into the carpet, leaving tracks just like they had dragged Kendrick out of my house 3 weeks ago. But this time there was no tragedy. There was only justice. As she passed Gavin, he tried to shrink into the wall. He was pressed against the paneling, sweating so hard his expensive suit was dark with moisture. He thought if he stayed quiet, maybe they would forget him. Maybe he could slip out the side door and disappear into the city. But justice does not forget. The agent stopped in front of him. He looked at Gavin with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Mr. Gavin Miller." Gavin swallowed. "I did not sign the loans," he squeaked. "That was all her. I am just a consultant." The agent smiled, a cold, humorless smile. "We are not here for the loans, Mr. Miller. We are here for the embezzlement. It seems the brokerage firm you worked for 5 years ago finally finished their audit. They found the missing $400,000, and they found the digital trail leading right to your personal account." Gavin's knees gave way. He slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor. He looked at the back of the courtroom. The bookie in the dark suit stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He looked at Gavin and gave a small mock salute. Then he turned and walked out. Gavin knew that prison was now the safest place for him. If the feds did not take him, the mob would. "I surrender," Gavin whispered, holding out his hands. "Please, just take me. Take me now." I watched them go. Delphine screaming curses at the son she abandoned, and Gavin weeping like a child. They were hauled out of the heavy double doors, and the silence that rushed back into the room was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was not the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of a storm that has finally broken. Judge Harrison cleared his throat. He looked at the empty defense table. He looked at the shredded paper on the floor. Then he looked at us. "Mr. Hayes," the judge said, addressing Kendrick, "it appears the conservator is indisposed." Kendrick stood up. He adjusted his cuffs. He looked calm, perfectly composed. "It appears so, Your Honor. Given the circumstances," the judge continued, "I am vacating the previous order. The conservatorship is dissolved, Mr. Kendrick Hayes. You are restored to full legal capacity. Your assets are your own. Your life is your own." "Thank you, Your Honor," Kendrick said. The judge banged the gavel. Case dismissed. The sound rang out like a church bell. Sloane closed her laptop with a soft snap. She let out a long breath, and her shoulders dropped 3 inches. She looked at me, and her eyes were shining with tears. We had done it. We had walked into the fire, and we had come out carrying the water. "Vernon," she whispered, "we won." I did not answer her. I turned to my son. Kendrick was standing there staring at the empty doorway where his mother had disappeared. His face was unreadable. He was holding his headphones in his hand, running his thumb over the smooth plastic. "Ken," I said softly. He turned to me. His eyes were clear. The terror was gone. The confusion was gone. "Is she coming back, Dad?" he asked. "No, son," I said, stepping closer. "She is not coming back, not for a long time." He nodded, slowly processing the data. "Good." She was loud. She brought chaos. I reached out my arms. For a second I hesitated. I remembered the protective order. I remembered the accusations of abuse. I remembered the world telling me I was dangerous. But then Kendrick did something he rarely did. He closed the gap. He stepped forward and wrapped his long arms around my shoulders. He buried his face in my neck. He smelled of charcoal and old paper and the soap I had bought for him since he was a baby. He did not squeeze hard. It was a firm, steady pressure, a grounding technique. "Thank you," he whispered against my collar. "Thank you for what, son?" I asked, blinking back tears. "For staying," he said. "You always stay." I hugged him back. I hugged him with all the strength of a 68-year-old mechanic who had spent 20 years fixing broken things, but realized he had raised something unbreakable. "I will always stay, Ken," I whispered. "I am your dad. That is the job." Sloane joined us, wrapping her arms around both of us. We stood there in the center of the courtroom, a tangle of arms and tears and relief. We were scarred. We were exhausted. I was broke. My house was vandalized. But we were free, and we were together. The judge watched us from the bench. He took off his glasses and wiped his eyes. He stood up and quietly left the room, giving us the privacy we had earned. "Let us go home, Dad," Kendrick said, pulling away. "I have an idea for a painting." "What is it?" I asked, wiping my face with my sleeve. "It is called The Debt," he said, "and it is going to be very expensive." We walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun. The air tasted sweet. The city noise, usually so overwhelming for Kendrick, seemed to fade into the background. We got into my beat-up old sedan, the one Delphine had laughed at. It started on the first try. 3 months have passed since that day in court. I am sitting in my kitchen now, watching the steam rise from my coffee cup. The window is open and I can smell the jasmine blooming in the garden. The house is quiet, but it is a good quiet. The red paint has been scrubbed off the driveway. The neighbors who threw eggs have come over with apologies and casseroles, but I mostly keep to myself. I do not need their validation. I know who I am. Kendrick is in the studio. He bought the house next door and converted it into a state-of-the-art workspace. He restored the old brick and put in the skylights I always wanted. He goes there every morning at 8 and comes home at 5. He likes the routine. Sloane is running the business. She is terrifyingly good at it. She set up a foundation in Kendrick's name that provides legal aid for disabled adults fighting guardianship abuse. She calls it the Red Binder Project. We never sold the NFT. Kendrick burned it. He sat at the computer one evening and with a single keystroke he deleted $2 million. He said it was blood money. He said he wanted to start fresh. And he did. His new collection sold out in 3 hours last week. Delphine is awaiting trial. She writes letters sometimes, long rambling letters blaming the lawyers, blaming Gavin, blaming me. I do not open them. I put them in a box in the garage. Someday, maybe when he is older, Kendrick might want to read them, but not today. Today is for peace. I take a sip of my coffee and look at my hands. They are still rough, they are still stained with oil, but they are steady. People ask me how I did it, how a simple mechanic outsmarted a team of high-priced lawyers and a manipulative sociopath. They ask me if I was scared. They ask me if I ever thought about giving up. And I tell them the truth. I was terrified every single second. But fear is just noise. And love is the signal that cuts through it. I learned something important in that courtroom. I learned that family is not about DNA. It is not about whose blood runs in your veins. That is just biology. Biology is an accident. Family is a choice. Family is the person who changes your diapers when you are 4 and holds your hand when you are 40. Family is the person who learns your secret language. Family is the person who is willing to stand in front of the bullet so you do not have to. Delphine shared Kendrick's genetic code, but she was a stranger. Sloane and I, we are his family because we showed up. We did the work. So look around you. Look at the people in your life. Do not look at who sends you a birthday card. Look at who answers the phone at 3 in the morning. Look at who stays when things get ugly. That is your family. Hold on to them. Fight for them. And if anyone tries to hurt them, you show them that the most dangerous thing in the world is not a man with a gun, but a person protecting the one thing that matters. My name is Vernon Hayes. I am a father. I am a mechanic. And I am the luckiest man alive. Thank you for listening to my story. If you enjoyed this, please hit that like button. It helps more than you know. And if you have ever had to fight for someone you love, let me know in the comments. I read every single one. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories about justice, resilience, and the truth finally coming to light. Until next time, take care of each other. And remember, never underestimate the quiet ones. They are usually the ones counting the cards. The most painful truth in this story isn't about the money. It is about the arrogance of absence. Delphine believed her biology gave her ownership, but she forgot that love is an active verb. You cannot abandon a garden for 20 years and expect to harvest the fruit just because you planted the seed. Vernon taught us that true power doesn't wear a designer suit, it wears grease-stained coveralls and shows up every single day. The quietest people often hold the loudest cards, and the strongest family bonds are built not by blood, but by the shared trenches of survival. If you believe that family is defined by loyalty, and not just blood, hit that like button to support the channel. Have you ever had to stand up for someone who couldn't stand up for themselves? Tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice served cold. See you in the next one.